you're not supposed to be here. And he wasn't saying it like, oh, you're somebody who's trying to stumble onto the side. It was direct. I know you. You're not supposed to be on this site. And I could tell that Terry wanted to say more to the guy.
Good evening, listeners, brave navigators of the enigmatic and the concealed. Have you ever felt the pull of the unanswered, the allure of the mysteries that shroud our existence? For more than a decade, a unique comic publisher has dared to dive into these mysteries, unafraid of the secrets they might uncover. This audacious entity is Paranoid American. Welcome to the mystifying universe of the Paranoid American podcast.
Launched in the year 2012, Paranoid American has been on a mission to decipher the encrypted secrets of our world. From the unnerving enigma of MK Ultra mind control to the clandestine assemblies of secret societies. From the awe-inspiring frontiers of forbidden technology to the arcane patterns of occult symbols in our very own pop culture. They have committed to unveiling the concealed realities that lie just beneath the surface. Join us as we navigate these intricate landscapes, decoding the hidden scripts of our society and challenging the accepted perceptions of reality.
Folks, I've got a big problem on my hands. There's a company called Paranoid American making all these funny memes and comics. Now, I'm a fair guy. I believe in free speech, as long as it doesn't cross the line. And if these AI-generated memes dare to make fun of me, they're crossing the line.
This is your expedition into the realm of the extraordinary, the secret, the shrouded. Come with us as we sift through the world's grand mysteries, question the standardized narratives, and brave the cryptic labyrinth of the concealed truth. So strap yourselves in, broaden your horizons, and steel yourselves for a voyage into the enigmatic heart of the Paranoid American podcast, where each story, every image, every revelation brings us one step closer to the elusive truth.
We're recording this on April 19th, 2026. This is exactly 31 years ago today was Oklahoma City bombing. And I'm going to talk about one of the few true American heroes that comes up that doesn't get any real praise. This is an unsung American hero named Terrence Yeakey. And if you're not familiar with his name, you're going to be by the end of this. He was one of the first responders to Oklahoma City. And I've got Tanya Yeakey here. Welcome to Paranoid American Podcast. Thank you so very much for your time and talking to me on today of all days. And by the way, we didn't plan this to be the day. It just happened to be the day we ended up scheduling this, I think, right? Is it just a coincidence we're talking on April 19th?
Yep. It was the available day after you and I chatted. So here we go. Let's get us. I'll get you out of the window. You can feel nice at home. You can take your shoes off. Your shoes aren't off already. You got an amazing looking home. Thank you.
I really want to get some of the broad strokes, and I'm going to tell it in the way that I've heard it in my notes,
sure,
just to see if you agree with all this and if there's anything that I'm missing on the broad strokes. All right. Okay. So, morning of Oklahoma City, April 19th, 1995. Terry was writing a ticket for someone outside the Civic Center Music Hall, which is half a mile away from the Murrah Building, which is the building that exploded. And essentially, he hears the explosion, and his first reaction is to run towards the danger, because that's what he's been trained to do, military, police officer. He runs there, and he personally ends up saving 3 or 4 different people. And in the course of this, he hurts himself and needs to go to the hospital. He hurts his back trying to help somebody out of the wreckage, essentially. And from this point forward, he's seen as a hero. They're trying to give him all this credit, but he doesn't necessarily want to be seen as a hero. And he also starts reporting things that are not necessarily along with the official stories. He mentions seeing some things when he was there, and it mentions not being able to tell his full story. And this eventually leads to some harassment. And then after a year, he dies under suspicious circumstances. And then after that, you don't really hear about Terrence Yeakey ever again, unless it comes up within either conspiracy lore or it's one of those remembering today, Oklahoma City, let's honor the first responders, but let's not look too much into the backstory of the first responders. Just honor them and move on. Did I miss any of the broad strokes of why Terrence Yeakey comes up?
No, that's pretty accurate as far as the broad strokes. There's going to be other things we'll kind of go zip into and hone into that are not exactly, but that was the official kind of coverage of it.
Okay, and then the most recent, I think, article on Terrence's story in general, CNN did something like 3 years ago, 2023, and they talked to his sister. They talked to a bunch of his friends that he played football with. They talked to ex-police officers, and they even talked to you for a little while. And then they say that she stopped answering the CNN reporters' calls, and they couldn't get anything else out of Tanya. What happened there? Did you really just stop answering calls, or like how did that play out?
So let's first of all remember that it's CNN, and so right. It's probably not my first choice of people. I mean, it's a great choice in terms of how many viewers they have, and the prestige they've always had as an organization. So yes, you would think that I'd want to be along for the ride. When I got the call from the researcher, he wasn't real specific about what he wanted to cover. And after many years of having to deal with not having a voice in the public, and I do want to hit on this point probably pretty early. One of the things that people assume is that I didn't want to be interviewed, or I didn't want anyone to talk to me. And actually, that's not the case. It was from the very day that he died, it was like a complete blackout of Tanya. No media would talk to me. They were intentionally trying to keep me from making any comments on Terry Yeakey. And so it wasn't that I didn't want to speak. I was completely shunned out of the media. And that was a strange thing to me, especially when I saw articles like the People magazine article, USA Today. No one would respond back to me. And I had an awful lot to say about it. And I'm sure that's the reason why they did not want to talk to me. So when Thomas Lake did reach out to me, I wanted a little bit more specifics of what he intended to do with the story. If it was just going to be just a replay of what we've heard for the last, almost 30 years. I think at that time, it would have been 26 years in when he reached out to me. And I told him, I was 26 years old when this happened. And now you're coming to me 26 years later. What is the plan? I'm a very different person than I was back at that time, probably a little more outspoken than I would have been even at that point in my life. And so I would like to know how you plan to approach the story. And I never could get any of that from him. And so I decided that I was a little concerned that it would just be another replay of, he killed himself. Yes, it's in lore, but there's really not much here that we can work with. I never got good explanations. And I've always been very concerned about who that is doing the coverage, because we have so many players that are still active in terms of wanting to keep the overall Oklahoma City bombing, the real truth of it coming out. And so I'm always very careful about who I'm going to speak with.
Which is why I extra appreciate your faith in me. We've been talking for years at this point. And I truly, before we even get into the death of Terry, which it's so unfortunate, like that becomes the story that everyone wants to talk about. I'm really interested in seeing him as just like a normal person, like 31 years ago. I want to know about the live Terry. For example, how did you meet Terry to begin with?
Oh, okay. Well, I actually met him when I went to a college to play basketball. I was in El Reno. It was a small community college, and I had a scholarship there. I promise you, by the time I got to meet Terry, I had been so tired of hearing his name. I can't even tell you. He was so popular in his hometown. He was like small town hero already, basketball player, just a really intelligent, good student. People really liked him in his town. So I think he had just gotten back from basic training. That was 1988. And he was at the gym where I was playing ball. And I really didn't give him much the time of day at first because he was kind of intimidating to me. He stood about 6'2.5", and all I heard was Terry Yeakey. And I'm like, okay, that's Terry Yeakey. Great. But he kept after it. He finally got a date out of me. And we spent our first date having, of all things, pie at a local restaurant. It was called Hensley's. It was just kind of a nice old family restaurant. And we talked pretty much the whole night, pie and coffee. And after that, we were inseparable.
What kind of like movies, music and stuff was Terry into?
That's a good question. Oh, that's so funny because most people don't. That's a great question. Terry was a very eclectic person. I think back then he introduced me. It wasn't just he liked R&B and soul, but he also liked things like Art of Noise and Yaz back in the day. I don't know if you're familiar with those kinds of bands. Some Yaz. Okay, so he was all over the place with his music, which is part of the things that made him a lot of fun. He liked action movies. He also liked horror movies, which I'm not the biggest horror fan. So he always got a kick out of, finding something to, scare me really, really good.
Like Nightmare on Elm Street kind of horror?
No, he had such a broad range. On his goofier side, I had to watch Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah, Yeakey was fun. He was very open and adventurous and interested in other people and other things. And so that's why his music and his taste in movie and interests, they were very broad.
What about religion? Was he into religion back then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was raised in a Methodist church by his mom. Of course, I've also made the differentiation that he was adopted. He was adopted by Juanita Yeakey when he was like 6 months old, and she raised him in a Methodist church there locally.
What about you? Were you religious too?
My family was not really the church-going type, but I was the type, once I got out on my own, that I've been non-denominational, but my grandmother was a strong Catholic. And so I had some of that upbringing, but, I'm a practicing Christian, but I didn't go to just an active church. So when I got with Terry, I spent a lot of time with his mother at the Methodist church. In fact, it was his pastor that married us.
Are you talking like every Sunday you'd go to church with him?
Not every Sunday, no. But, it's because there's it's not a big distance, but I'd say El Reno was about 30 minutes out from where we lived in the city. So sometimes, because it's not every Sunday did she want to go because Miss Yeakey was a little older when she adopted him. So it was kind of hit and miss. She was more active when she was younger, but as she got older, it was, a couple times a month, when she felt like it.
What about like politics? Were either of you political at any point in like the 1988?
I think we were both students of politics. We were interested and active. He had a strong desire to be active in his community. And at certain times, he expressed that he might even want to launch off into politics later on in his life. But as far as being active, we had a very, very quick 5 years worth of a lot going on, from him going to war in the first Gulf War, him coming. He was actively in his police training when he got called up. And then the bombing happens, and it was like a quick 5-year period. So the time to be into an organized type of any kind of political action, we didn't have a lot of time for it at that juncture of our life. But we were both politically active, voted, cared about what was going on in the community, and he was very interested in issues with teens. And one of the things he wanted to do as he got older was to open a community center. So it would have been a part of our lives more actively, not maybe in our young lives, but as we aged and, went further into our marriage and the things that we wanted to do together, I could see that being a part of our lives.
You said he was kind of like a hometown hero, and then he turns into big man on campus. So he's kind of got like strong alpha personality. It sounds like you describe him, and everyone that seems to know him describe him as very altruistic. Like he just wanted to help people and develop community and things like this. Did that carry over into the police force too? Like, did he have a lot of like close-knit cop friends, or was he a little bit of an outcast, or what was the dynamic with him as a police officer?
That's really interesting that you asked that question, because altruistic is a good word to describe Terry. I think we both shared that trait in common. One of the things that made us get along. I'd say he had a lot of personal friends, but when it came to the police force, you have to remember at that time, Oklahoma City. It's not like being in another large city. Let's say New York, that's much more diversified, or California or such. Oklahoma City Police Department at that time, out of 1,100 officers, only 67 of them were minorities, and so gelling into that group. How do I say this? So. Let me back up just a little bit to fill this in a little bit more. I wouldn't say he had a lot of friends. He had some friends. He had some people that he considered to be close. But I wouldn't say he was the same as he was in his personal life. They were limited in the police department. And I would say most of them were probably minority officers. There were a few here and there, like I know Stephen Vassar's been brought up. Terry was friendly and sociable with everyone. But as far as really, really close with other officers on the force and socializing on a regular basis, no, he was not so much that way. And I can only expect that might have changed as time moved on. But like I said, we had a very short window to which we were working with between going to war and the Oklahoma City bombing. That was literally 5 years. So.
The other reason I asked that question too, just part of my own bias, is whenever someone is truly altruistic and is like the good guy, the one that might call you out on doing something bad, I just imagine throwing someone into a huge pool of tens of thousands of people, and you're going to have some bad apples in that group. And if it's always kind of worked that way, then usually the altruistic alpha big man on campus doesn't thrive as well in those situations, because you bump up against other people.
Yes, and that's what I wanted to go into a longer answer on, but I was trying to circle back to the question you actually asked me, which was, did he have friends? But, where that altruism and that genuineness, he was a very warm personality, full of care for other people. So, children as a result were very receptive to him. All those very qualities that you were talking about, being altruistic, well, that translates well to certain people, and those are the ones that he made a big impression on. But when you translate that to brass at the OCPD, not so much. Altruism isn't really one of those traits that they're looking for in an officer.
Well, let me ask the opposite of that question.
Sure.
Did he make any enemies? Did he have any specific friction that he kept running into? Like you mentioned, one of less than 100 minorities out of thousands of cops. I mean, was there overt racism that he was actually having to deal with on any sort of basis?
Oh yeah. And one of them yes, he did have some enemies, and one in particular, which makes me glad that I did not do the CNN interview, was because this officer was inexplicably brought up after 26 years, has never been mentioned in Terry's story. And this is a character and figure that I recall not positively. And also that Terry feeling like he was dealing with racism in terms of this particular supervisor. And that was Larry Spruel. And he was brought up as someone who's commenting on Terry in the CNN article, and I was extremely upset about that.
I feel like that's a pretty common theme where the people that were antagonistic to someone years later when they're doing the reports, all they crawl out of the woodwork and it's like, oh, we were best friends. And it's sort of like the criminals that have to insert themselves into the crime scene and insert themselves into the investigation. There's like a needing to keep returning back to it. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, I was very uncomfortable. In fact, just before Terry was going to graduate from what they call their field training officer stage, and that's where he encountered Larry Spruel. He was his FTO, and a week before he had to deploy for the Gulf War, suddenly Larry Spruel starts claiming that Terry's having trouble hearing his radio. And he doesn't allow him to pass. He's the only officer. He had no complaints with him, but save one. He had another complaint. He thought Terry should have been far more aggressive than what he displayed. And I know that Terry would say things like, look, I'm 6'2.5", and people, look at me like they have to be a little concerned about whether I'm going to be problematic and aggressive. And so I make it a point to speak a little softer, especially if it's a female I'm speaking to. He's like, I don't know how tall Spruel was, but I don't think he was a very big guy. He's like, at your height, maybe you have to put a little more, bravado into it. I don't, and I don't want to. And so, there was just, Spruel was always making comments about his person, his character, little sly comments. And so him and Terry did not get along. He's not somebody I would have expected to ever come out of the woodworks. But nonetheless, due to a report that Larry Spruel made on him the week before he's getting to deploy for war, Terry ended up, when he came back 6 months later from war, had to redo his entire FTO phase. And he's the only officer that had to do that. We were pretty upset. We thought that was walking outside of federal guidelines, but he didn't want to make waves, so we just did what he needed to do.
But to both of you at that time, it seemed like that was some sort of retaliatory, like he was instigating something. And as you're describing, that Terry was more of a de-escalation person.
Correct.
This guy wanted Terry to escalate, and he was angry for that and other reasons. So he was just sort of antagonizing Terry over this.
Yes, and to me, it was a weird flex, showing him that he had power over him. And, something to know about Terry is that, some of us don't know exactly what we want to be in life. He was not that person. He was blessed with the understanding that he wanted to pursue a career in law enforcement. And that's ever since he was a child. And so this is something that's, deeply important to him. And threats against that, he's going to take pretty seriously. So as much as he may have wanted to protest, he did not. He wanted to go forward with his chosen profession. So, but that was a tough one.
Is there anything else that the media completely misses whenever they talk about Terry and they bring up? Usually it's like the way that he died and not necessarily the way that he lived. Is there any, I didn't know that he wanted to start helping youth and get into politics and wanted to be a cop ever since he was a kid. Like, all that's new and fresh information for me. Like, what else is something that doesn't usually get out there about him?
Let me think. I don't think that there was much of his personal life involved. Much of him personally really involved in those. It's like they talked around it. They categorized things. But,
How did he feel about the military versus how he felt about the police?
Well, after he came back from the Gulf War, not so great. He got out of the military after that. He had intended to be 20 years in, and there were things that he said that he saw over there too that he wasn't okay with.
He was in the military for 20 years?
No, he had intended to be in the military for 20 years.
Oh, he wanted to be a lifer. Yeah. Okay. How long was he actually in for?
Maybe just his 6 initial. He got out after the Gulf War. he thought that was going to be something that was going to be with him for a long term. And I remember him talking about a lot of the prisoners. He was military police, and a lot of the prisoners that they were taking at that time, they were children, they were teens with guns. And I know there was some other things that he says that he saw that were, not what we would expect the military to be doing, but, I'll not comment too much on that because that's not really, that's not something I have a lot of knowledge in. So I want to be careful about commenting, but those were his feelings. And he acted on those feelings by getting out of the military as soon as he could. So he did not continue.
Same way that he became disillusioned with the military once he actually got to see the sausage being made. And he's like, okay, I don't want to do it for the rest of my life. Did he ever feel that way about police work at any point? Or do you think that he genuinely liked police work and felt that he could make a good difference the entire time he was a cop?
After the bombing, he definitely was disillusioned.
Before the bombing, we're talking before the here. I realize everything probably.
No, he was still in altruistic Terry Good Guy mode. I mean, and if he wasn't going to make his complete career law enforcement the majority of his life, he would have translated it to something else. Like I said, he had aspirations to do things with youth, and also potentially a political career. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but he had mentioned it more than once in our relationship that would be an excellent launch pad. I think that's pretty common.
It honestly sounds like that was the trajectory that he was on, especially if that was what his aspirations were. And the way you describe them, it sounds like when he had a goal and he had a path to get to that goal, he would just get on that path and get to that goal. And then it would be the next thing. So if he wanted to open up a youth center, if he wanted to be in local politics or anything, it sounds like that's exactly what he was on track to do.
Yeah. I mean, as someone who was adopted, he really greatly appreciated the fact that someone loved him and took care of him. And he grew up in a community to where he had, family and friends and aunties and uncles. And, he had community around him. He and the guys would get together and play pickup basketball every Sunday out at the high school. Those things were important to him. So making a strong community was something that he would have had an interest in long term, no matter what we did. And he was very active to giving. I mean, he always was giving to Make-A-Wish Foundation. He wanted to work with them on any projects that they had. That was just kind of his personality. He wanted to always make a difference, and he deeply cared about children, about what their lives would look like. In fact, I think there is the only video recording of him that is at the National Memorial, which you have to go and basically do excavation to find it. But I think I've posted it before. He talks. That's what his focus is about. You never know what one of these children would have grown up to do that died in the bombing. Could have been the next president, could have determined the cure for cancer. This is a forward-thinking man. He's thinking about future all the time and what that looks like to care for your children all the way up and guide them through their lives. And so he just had a deep, caring personality. And like I said, I think it's because of being an adopted person himself. He had a strong belief system in taking care of those around you.
Did he ever meet or find out who his birth parents were, or meet any siblings or anything, or was he an orphan that never found out the rules?
No. Okay, he did know who his birth mom is, and she's been quoted quite a bit in a lot of these stories, which I've had some contention with. He knew the majority of his siblings. That's an interesting part of the story. We might, we can get into that, but it really goes down a pretty big hole because it's one of the issues that I have with how it's been projected in the media. Mrs. Yeakey, his adopted mom, she passed away the year before. Like, I think she passed away in 1995. The bombing happened in April, and she passed away in July. And because of that, once when he did pass in 1996, we had another coming out of the woodworks. And in this case, it was his biological mother. And of course, because of the way that they tried to spin the stories between me and him, there was a lot of difficulty with his sisters, and just I don't even know how to begin to unpack this part of the story.
I can lead us into that a little bit more too, just because one of the other questions I have is that, like, what did Terry see and who did he tell about it? But first, let's get to like the actual day, because we've got how Terry was up until this particular moment, and then things changed quite a bit after the bombing. So everything changed on the actual day of the bombing. So he shows up, and he is this first responder. He ends up hurting his back, and that's when you come into the story, is that you needed to go and pick him up from the hospital. Is that how that played out?
As far as the bombing part of the story is what we're going towards, you're asking me.
You didn't realize that Terry was involved in the bombing, and that that he was even a first responder.
Yeah. So, okay. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about where I was at the time. When the bomb went off, I was at work, and I worked about 8 miles northeast of the Murrah Building. I was at the state capitol area. Huh?
Did you actually hear it or anything 8 miles away?
I saw it. I could see the mushroom cloud. That's what I'm trying to get at. So, yeah, I had a perfect view of it. I worked for a state employee assistance program for the Department of Human Services. And I could literally step right outside my back door. So I saw the mushroom cloud as it was rising above the downtown area. And so the first thing that comes up in my mind, I don't know what it is, but I think a few of the guys that were next door to me in Merit Protection Commission, they came running over to check and make sure I was okay. And then, we had walked outside to see it. So we came back in and we turned on the TV. And that's where we saw the image of the building, that there was some kind of explosion. The first thing in my mind is that's Terry's district. Terry was often downtown dropping off, his dry cleaning, because he used like an old historic dry cleaner in the downtown area. But anyway, so it's possible he could have been driving through the area. Anything is possible at that point. But if you think about back in 1995, we don't have cell phones. We got snazzy pagers, right? That's the only way we've got to communicate. So I did page him immediately. I did not expect a quick response. I was hoping for one. I mean, obviously, I just think I put in like a code for, check the welfare. We had little codes to say how much I really need you to call me back. But I didn't hear from him. And once we saw what was going on downtown, I knew I was going to be in a holding period of waiting. At about 9:45, I think, 9:30, 9:45, they released most of the state agencies to evacuate the area, because we were close enough that, there was concerns, for other bombs in the building and such. And so they released state employees. And I stayed behind because of what the work we did. My boss was a therapist. And so he immediately went downtown and, joined the chaplains that were going to be in the area. And I was going to stay and man the phones in case he needed me. So I wasn't going to leave, except, I told him I might leave to go home and check on my own kids and, stabilize everybody and then come back down. So I was still waiting to hear from Terry. I finally went home to check on the kids, like I said. And it was just as I was getting ready to leave that I finally got the call. And it was a doctor. Doctor says, Ms. Yeakey. And I said, yes. He says, we have Terrence down here at Presbyterian Hospital. And he's been injured, and I know he said other things to me, but, I had that brief moment of, thank God, I'm hearing something and he's okay, but he's in the hospital. And I can't remember everything that was said other than, he really wants you to come and pick him up. So I went down there to pick him up. And of course, it's just chaos everywhere, if you can imagine. Presbyterian was probably the closest hospital to the downtown area. And when I got there, they led me in towards the back, and it was these makeshift kind of triage rooms because there were so many people, coming in and out of the hospital. And the doctor stopped me and he says, I want you to be prepared for what you're going to see when you go in. And I just said, okay. And he says, he's not doing very well. He's had a really rough time down there, and he's really injured his back. He fell through some debris through a floor while he was carrying someone else. And I really feel like he needs to stay, but he's insisting he leave. And so he's like, I'm kind of dependent on you to see if you can, talk him into just going ahead and staying so we can run some tests on him. And anytime you have a question, feel free to just, stop me here because I can pause. But if you want me to keep going, I can.
No, please go on. I'm curious. Was his back hurt that bad? It sounds like what the floor gave out under him and he fell an entire story holding a person. That's essentially what happened.
Yes. He was holding Randy Ledger. Randy Ledger was an employee of the GSA, and Randy was a big guy. Randy was about 300 pounds himself. Anyway, but and we'll get more into Randy's part of the story, but yes, so his back was severely injured. He could not walk. He was he needed help to just stand upright. But anyway, so I told the doctor, I was like, okay, let me go in and talk to him, by myself for a minute. And I think the doctor was really worried about his appearance, but, we'd been together for a while. It's not the first time that I'd seen Terry on a bad call. There was like a flood in 1992 where he came home chest deep with mud because he was in the river trying to help someone. And so I'd seen him in those circumstances where, it's a rough day and it's just not the scene you expect. But when I opened the curtain back, he looked relieved to see me, but I could see very clearly what the doctor was talking about. He looked like there was white on both arms and elbows, like he'd been digging through the rubble. There was a lot of blood on his uniform. He had a strange look to him. I wouldn't call it shock at all, but it was somewhere between fear and anger. It was a very strange kind of feel to him, not something that I had seen before. And so I went up to him and, I went out to touch him, and I should have known better because, Terry was he was very cautious in that regard. If he thought that he had something that might have fluid, blood fluid, anything, he wouldn't want you to touch him. So, immediately he was like, no, don't touch. But he did pull me in close and he said, whatever you have to say, whatever you've got to do, get me out of here. And so I pulled back to kind of look at his face, kind of, assess how serious he is about that. He sounds pretty serious. And I said, they really think you should stay. He's like, get me out of here. Get me out of here right now. And I'm like, oh. So about that time, the doctor comes in and, I'm not doing my job too well of convincing him that he should stay. But I could tell from his expression. And he said, there's going to be a lot of other people that are going to need this hospital bed. I need to leave.
You?
Huh?
Terry said that or the doctor said that?
Terry
about
said
the hospital bed? Okay.
Terry said that. And so I felt like that was just his final, reason to be let go. But it was really clear that he did not want to remain in that hospital for any reason at all. But I felt like there was more to it than that. But of course, we have just utter chaos going on around us. And I'm trying to assess the situation and also do what's best for him. And so I just told the doctor, I said, I'll take responsibility for him. I'll get him to a specialist the next day. Just, he's probably right, and you're probably not going to convince him otherwise. So let me just take him. And I really didn't know how bad it was until they had to load him into the car. I had one of those Ford Explorers at that time, and Terry had to be wheeled out. He could not stand. Two guys had to help him in the back of the Explorer because he wouldn't sit in the front seat with me. He did not want me touching him. But once everything was, settled and we were on the road, that's when I could hear him. It's like there's 3 seats back. He's in the very, very back of the Explorer. And I could hear him kind of crying a little bit. It wasn't loud. It wasn't anything. It just, I could hear grief. And I asked him, I was like, "Are you okay?" And he wouldn't say anything. And so I pulled over someplace because I wanted to lay eyes on him and see what was going on. And when I came to the back of the car, he was still crying a little bit, nothing extreme, just some tears going. And that's when he said, "It's not what they're saying it is, Tanya. Don't believe what they're saying on TV. It's not what they're portraying it." And, this is kind of a weird thing to hear from somebody. And I'm really trying to focus primarily on him as a man, as someone who's injured, but he's telling me things that are not what you would expect him to say. So that was the first time that I heard that something was off about what was going on in the downtown area. But I'm not pressing.
April 19th that he's in the car and he's telling you that something's not right. It's still day of we're talking about.
3 hours out. 3 hours after the bombing. Yeah.
And I'm just curious, do you know that through his work on the police force and his time in the military, had he seen human tragedy before? Or was this like the first time that he had seen bodies? Or was it not that? Was it not just seeing something traumatic happen? It was something more than that.
Yeah, like I mentioned a little earlier, there was a flood at Lightning Creek in 1992. And the reason he came home, with mud up to his chest is because he had gotten into the river. There was a lady and her baby that did not make it out. Some people made it, some people did not. And so, and of course, Terry had been to war. And so he witnessed bodies there as well. So I didn't feel like this was a situation in which I was just dealing with somebody who was just in stress and shock. He meant something. There was, and that was Terry's nature. Just like I said, he was full of care. Terry's also full of meaning. He didn't say things mildly and casually. Okay. And so, my main thought at that time was see to his needs and make sure he's okay first. Even though I'm curious and I want to know, because people have asked me, why didn't you ask him more questions? Not the time and place. And so, I said, okay. I asked him if he wanted to talk. No, I don't want to talk about it right now. Want something to eat on the way home? No, just get me home. So I did. And, getting him out of the car was really, really rough because he had.
That was just you, right? Like before, you had 2 guys helping you load him in the car.
It was me. Fortunately, the lady that watched my children, her name was Deborah. She was like 5'10", and she used to do a lot of work with quadriplegic individuals. So she came out and she helped me with him. But of course, kids were at home. Kids were small at that time. They weren't in school yet. And so Deborah came out and stayed with him for a second. I went in and I had a 3-year-old at that time who is used to, daddy, 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 she's going to jump on him. And I know he's not going to want her to touch him. So I gave her some instructions and, she's a smart little girl. So she was like, oh, okay, daddy hurt. Okay. So we got that straightened out. And then Deborah and I helped him in the back. He came through the back door where he promptly, before he even walked in the door, he had us strip him down to his T-shirt and his boxers because he wanted no possibility of, one of the children touching it, because it really was. It was very bloodstained. And then we didn't make it any further than the living room. So he was on the couch, and he literally, he cried again, and he went to sleep for a while. And so that was our first few days were him sleeping a lot, and he was in a lot of pain. And just caring for him. But during that time period, I got a call from the first start of brass bothering me was when I got a call from Lieutenant Joanne Randall. And I guess she forgot she wasn't talking to someone who was police on the phone. And she has a very gruff kind of demeanor and tells me I need to speak to Terry. And I said, he's sleeping. And she reiterated it like I was her subordinate. And I promptly let her know that, I was like, he's asleep. And when he's awake, I'll let him know you called. I'm not waking him. I just flat told her, I'm not waking him. And it threw her off guard because she's used to, barking orders.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely not at this house. I'm sorry, but and she called, and I encountered Joanne Randall more than once, because the second time sometimes I forget whether it was the first time or second time, but one of the two is when she indicated, you tell Terry that if he doesn't get his report in, there's going to be a reprimand for that. She was already worried about what he was going to say in a report. And that started on the first day as well.
He hadn't put a report in at this point because he was first responder, got hurt. You picked him up from the hospital. You brought him home, and he's like sleeping it off and trying to recover from a bad back. So at this point, he has not done any sort of official report whatsoever, right?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, so first, his commanding officer is calling you up and hounding you to get him to put his paperwork in. And you're trying to tell her, like, hey, he's hurt right now and he's recovering and he doesn't need to worry about doing paperwork. But that was her prerogative. Okay.
That was her focus. Yeah. And it was a very tense moment. I mean, I don't really tend to get very loud and abrasive, but I'll let you know. It's like, no, I'm not waking him. It doesn't matter.
Just asking out of ignorance, I don't know if you know this answer either, but why would she be, before we get into the conspiracy angle, but like officially, why would she be so adamant about getting Terry's report on what happened in such a short order? Like, why not let him recover first and gather his thoughts and then turn it in? Like, what do you think the rush was? Was it to just see what he thought he saw as soon as possible to get it on the books, or what?
I mean, I could speculate all day long.
Well, let's speculate just a little bit.
Speculate a little bit? Okay. Well, I would say, considering that his 9-page report comes up missing after he does it, I'm sure it was, they wanted to know what he was going to put in the report, what he saw, what he saw, when he saw it, who was there, who was with him. All those details are going to be pretty important to what's going on in the downtown area that morning. I mean, this is a crime scene. But they sure didn't really seem to want his opinions. They didn't want his fact finding, because to this day, it's another thing. I'm stopping mid-sentence, but I hinge it on the fact that his report still to this day is not ever been quoted, not ever been produced. If it was so important, I mean, who he saw, what he was doing. I mean, he was one of the officers that did not leave when the building was to be evacuated. He was one of the officers that actually secured the perimeter when the second bomb scare was occurring and everyone was leaving. Terry refused to go. And so it's like the fact that she wanted it so quickly and then it's missing for all eternity now. I think tells you that there's a big problem with what he may have saw, that they wanted that to go away. And when I stopped mid-sentence, what I was going to say on that is another one of the things that Terry said to me on the first day of the bombing was that if an image of him had not gone, no, it would have been the second day, excuse me, the image of him had not gone national and international of him running from the building, that they had told him that he was never there at that site. They told him they were going to erase him from having any involvement in the downtown area, but they couldn't do it because there was a picture as evidence. So I think those two things played into the hurry up and write your report. There was something obviously that they were concerned about that he would say, because the story that I have heard, I try to be really careful about the things that he told me specifically versus what someone else later who I've, had contact with and also know details of, what's going on with the conspiracy. I try to differentiate between those two things as much as possible. But, for all intents and purposes, Terry told me right off the bat that they were going to say he was never down there. And later reports also indicate from others that Terry was quite verbal when he was down at the site, that he is reported to have gotten into some contention with the ATF officers who claimed that they free fell in the elevators that morning. And that story was debunked. And so, there was a reason for people to be concerned that maybe Terry wasn't going to be the type to go along to get along. So I think that some of that played a factor as well.
So that's not something I'm really familiar with, that
Okay.
There were ATF officers that claimed that they got harmed in a free falling elevator.
Yeah, well, as you know, one of if you know who Kathy Sanders is, her daughter Edie Smith, I think her sons were named Chase and Colton. They perished in the building, and when Edie was down there, there was I don't know if it was FBI or ATF. I believe it was an ATF officer. Yes, it must have been, because he said that they were tipped on their pagers to not come into the office that morning. And that was one of the things that Edie Smith kept pushing about. Why were they tipped to not come into this building? It has been reported by other people who are also downtown with Terry during that time that he got into a fight with two of the ATF officers who came out of the building, and they tried to claim that they basically, clawed and karate chopped their way out of the building, to get outside. And yet Terry said something to the effect of, "You look like you just came out of your shower. You're not dirty. You don't look like you came out of that building." And, when somebody of Terry's size and stature is kind of giving you the what for, I'm sure it was a little intimidating for him to be, that direct with someone, from the ATF. But I'm sure as far as he was concerned, that was his district. He's a cop in Will Rogers Division. The building sits in their district. He's probably thinking he has some authority, to act in the manner in which he thinks that he needs to. So I don't think he was too concerned about what he said to those two ATF officers. But obviously someone was concerned.
Did he make any observations about how quickly so many different ATF agents were on the site and strapped up? Because that's, I guess, one of the other elements of this. The conspiracy angle of this is not only advance notice, but be ready for when this thing happens. And all of a sudden, all the ATF officers are there on scene, almost as if, they knew something was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's an indication from him also that there was already, if you think about Terry was there at 9:04. That's the time frame accounts put him in. So within 2 minutes, that there was already yellow police tape on the back side, or I want to say it was the south side of the building. Who put that tape up? It's 2 minutes after the bombing. He's one of the first, if not arguably the first, to show up at the scene. Where did the tape come from to, section it off? And It is reported. I can't say that he told me this directly, but there are reports that Bomb Squad was on the scene. Other people in tactical gear were on the scene. I can't speak to that directly. I can only speak to what I've been told since then. But it makes a lot of sense that the way Terry was acting and with the first day, that those were great possibilities. And so I put a lot of stock into some of those other stories that have been told by other police, other fire, and even witnesses that were just driving by who were, civilians.
Did Terry ever tell you directly that he saw something specific?
So he didn't tell me directly, Tanya, I saw bombs, or I saw a launcher, a rocket launcher or something like that. But a couple of days after the bombing, would have been, I believe, about the 21st, that he asked me to take him back down to the site. And Terry still could not walk yet. Okay. So he couldn't drive down there on his own. He asked me to take him down to the site because he wanted to see something beneath the pillars of the daycare. He was very specific about the location. And looking back, that's a really critical thing where my part of the story comes in, because in 1995, these are not details that were out. They weren't even out in 2005. So for me to have said on an interview that I did with Craig Roberts in like 1998 or something, I tell this story about how he has me to drive him back down late at night to try to get back on the site. And he is stopped by two men. And I cannot recall if they had ATF or FBI on the back of their jacket, but they were wearing one of those jackets that has the 3 letters on the back. And the guy he ran into was like, "You're not supposed to be here." And he wasn't saying it like, "Oh, you're somebody who's trying to stumble onto the site." It was direct. "I know you. You're not supposed to be on this site." And I could tell that Terry wanted to say more to the guy, but it made him concerned that I was with him, clearly, because he's kind of giving me the look at him, the periphery, and I'm looking at him the same way, the peripheral vision, because I don't know what's going on here, but I can tell that they know each other. They absolutely recognize each other. And this guy's like, "You're not allowed back on this site." So when that happened, Terry, when we left, he told me, "Please do not ever come back down here. I don't care which one of your friends, are, helping out, doing some of the volunteer work. Don't come back down here and be seen." And after that, he left the house. He wouldn't stay at the house any longer. There was something, he was definitely alarmed at us having been cited and him having been removed off the site or being told he could not come back to the site. So that's the only thing he indicated, is there was something underneath the daycare that he wanted to see. And, I think it's the part of the relevance. I don't know all of the relevance, but what I suspect part of the relevance is that we can confirm is that the ATF had a storage closet that backed up to the back of the daycare. And it was said that the ATF had munitions in that closet that did not belong there. So I don't know what they might have come across. I know that Terry was there at the daycare. I know he was pulling children out. And that was another thing a little earlier when you had given the kind of broad synopsis. You said 3 to 4 people that he saved. It was actually more, but Terry was moving so fast and saving and pulling out so many people that, if you think about it, as the police have wanted to kind of develop this story to minimize him, they can't say how many people he actually pulled out so quickly, because other people, pulled out of the building when the second bomb scare happened. Terry's still in the building saving people. Terry doesn't leave. Okay. And I guess my point that I'm trying to make is that he was in that area of the daycare. He was in that main area of the GSA, all that first floor area. If he saw, if there was something to see in that area, there's a very high possibility that he would have been the one to perhaps document that. So.
And at what point, so this is, you said like the 21st, we'll say it's like a few days after the actual bombing is when he asked you to come back. At what point does he write his 9-page original report that gets lost? Is it around the same time or is this way after that?
No, it would have been probably on the 20th that he was writing the report the next day. And then on the 21st is when he wanted to go back down to the site. It was a couple weeks later, he came back to the house and he was fuming because he said that they lost his report, that it just was quote unquote missing. So that was a couple of weeks out.
But it sounds like within the first 3 hours of the bomb actually going off, the way that you're describing it and the way that his behavior is being described was that he knew something was amiss. He knew that whatever he saw, whatever his story was not going to be the official story. They're telling him you were never here, but unfortunately for them, he was becoming like this hero, right? It's like, here's this Terry Yeakey is a hero, and they can't necessarily cancel that story out. So now there's a problem on their hands. He writes this 9-page report that gets lost. Then there was also some reports that he had a storage unit. And then for the next year, he was amassing all sorts of just, I've heard it vaguely described as just evidence for a year. You have any idea? Is that accurate? Was he like finding evidence on his own? Did he turn into like an investigator on Oklahoma City at some point?
Well, he didn't tell me those things, but his behavior suggested that yes, that is possibly true. Also, who he was affiliated with. I have brought up a group called Heroes of the Heart that were doing a pictorial book on the bombing to it was basically to honor all the heroes. And that group had amassed so many images of the building that they came on the radar of course, the FBI, and they wanted to see what images they had. Terry was part of that group, as was another person, Dr. Don Chumley, Ramona McDonald, also Don Browning, who has been very vocal about Terry's death. He was a K-9 officer. Are you familiar with him?
Not as much as I should be.
Oh, okay. So he was working with this group. And like I said, they came on the radar of the FBI, who basically wanted to stop the book from being written, stop the images from being published. In fact,
for national security reasons, I assume.
So they say. But then it got, what's really, really interesting. By the way, several of the people that were associated with this group are also no longer with us. Dr. Don Chumley was one of them, and he was with Terry in the downtown area saving people. In fact, the story that I've been told from Ramona McDonald, who was part of the group, she was basically spearheading the group, was that Dr. Don Chumley was approached by those same ATF officers, and they wanted Dr. Chumley to bandage them for injuries they didn't have. And Dr. Chumley apparently said no. I know Terry was supposed to have been around at this time as well. He may have gotten involved in that conversation as well as the whole, that was the second part of the, you don't look like you free fell from an elevator, and you don't look like you crawled your way out of the building. They wanted Dr. Chumley to bandage him.
The way that you're describing, and this is me putting like my interpretation on this, but the way that you're describing this, it almost sounds like those two ATF agents that fell from the free fall over, like they were supposed to be what Terrance Yeakey ends up being. They were supposed to be the first on-site responders that got hurt in the process, and now like the story gets to get funneled through them. But since Terrence beat them to it, Terry beat them, then he becomes the face of it in a way that everyone's trying to sort of change that trajectory.
Yes, they were. It's very interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Okay, because that explains why they're there, why they want to be seen as being hurt, why they wanted to be the first responders, is so that they might have already known what story to tell. Again, that's my tinfoil hat on.
Interesting. No, I had not. I mean, but it makes sense. I just hadn't really considered that. Usually I just have a bit of ire about the fact that, here he's trying to do his job. He's trying to save lives. And what are they doing? I just, that's why my mind wouldn't have even picked up on that factor. But I bet you're right about that.
So there's another dynamic here that comes up in a lot of the articles written about Terry, and it's about that the Oklahoma Police Department wanted to give him this like Medal of Valor for all of his actions, and that inexplicably he did not want this Medal of Valor. And I mean, I can surmise it's because he already has a bad taste in his mouth about everything. Did he talk about why he didn't want the Medal of Valor? Was this like a point of contention for him, or is this just something people throw into the articles?
I think it's more what they throw into the articles to create to be there. Terry's position is, I was doing my job. I was doing what anyone else should have been doing. So I don't feel like a hero. And I'm also not going to, there was never any indication of him being depressed because he could have saved more lives. That is bogus. That is not the case at all.
That is where that particular story tends to dovetail, where it's like, well, he was going through such a traumatic moment of PTSD that he didn't want to be reminded about this thing that had happened, that it sent him into this horrible depression, and that was what justifies his untimely death, essentially, which we're get into a second. There was one other thing that happens before Terry leaves us, and that was that you mentioned, actually it was right after he dies, that you said there was a burglary in your home, and that some of the things that he had given you, there was like a VCR and a VHS tape that had who knows what on it that goes missing immediately after. Like, give any like what actually happened that day? When did you come home? How did you notice that you were burglarized? Like, what did you notice missing?
So I actually dealt with several burglaries and several vandalisms and bashed out windows in the back of my house and such, so much that I moved out of my home just weeks before he died. That particular incident, just before he died, yes. And he knew that I moved out of it because I was afraid, and I didn't know what it was. I wasn't being afraid of him. It was afraid of something else and someone else that was like, I had, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 incidences in which I would roll up into my driveway and get 4 nails in at least 2 tires. Okay. That happened multiple times. And I reported them as well, because it was clear that it was a repetitive harassment. Okay. The windows on the back of the house, 3 of them busted out and shattered. And I know that Terry was going through a lot of the same things. But the incident with the VCR, that's like just 2 days before he died. That when he put the VCR in the back of my car and I did take it up into the house, it disappeared. And when I went to go look for it, because things were happening so fast in that 48 hours after he's gone, that I don't even think about the VCR till later. It's missing. It's missing. And even though I had moved to a different place, I actually moved into an apartment that cost me twice as much as my mortgage, and was 3 flights up and had an alarm on it because I was so scared. I was having people come, I don't know who, but they were coming in and moving things around and making it evident that someone had been there. So much such that I asked the apartment complex, hey, have you been in my apartment for any reason? Did you have to come in and spray? No. But there were telltale signs of someone being in the house. And then it got a little more aggressive as it went along. like not just the small things out of place that make you go, yeah, maybe I just forgot, to really overt things. And that persisted for 2 years after his death. I went through that. But anyway, on the VCR, was that your main question there?
Well, I've got a follow-up on that. If this is happening weeks before his death, and you're dealing with people breaking out your windows and essentially just harassment, did you have in your mind why you were being harassed? Is it because Terry wasn't playing ball? Is that was there an understanding between you and Terry that this is why this is happening, or was it just feel like general terrorism to you guys at that point?
I think he knew. And I don't think he was going to give voice to it specifically to me. I think he was worried that if I knew anything.
Did you have an idea that this was related to Terry not playing ball?
No, because he was not indicating what it was. I just knew it was happening. And there's a lot of time period between, the most honest thing you'll hear from a man probably is in those first few moments, like he did to me when he first got in the car with me. But I think he realized as an officer and also as a protector that he should not say too much to me. And so it started getting less and less of what he would, let loose of and say. And that created some problems with he and I because, I was pretty patient at the onset because Terry was usually pretty generous with information, even with things that had to do with his job, cases he worked and such. As much as he could tell me and entertain me with stories, he would really share a lot of information. But after the bombing, that changed. And once he realized, after we came back from the site where that officer turned him away and he recognized him, then he became extremely careful about what he said to me. And so when these things start happening, like the harassment in the house, he's taking note of it, but he's not putting the two and two together for me. He's not connecting them for me.
Right. He's giving you like your plausible deniability and keeping you ignorant in hope to keep you safe.
I think so. I really do. I think that he kind of messed up at the beginning because he was in a safe place. But then once he realized that there was actual danger from that point on, he was not giving information. And so when I moved out of the house and put me and the girls up in an apartment where I felt safer, that's when he started telling me a little more of his plans, which was to leave the police department. He did say he had an interview going with the FBI. I didn't know what that was about. I assumed it to be a job. It may or may not have been. I don't know. I sometimes think that I think a lot of people, let me preface it this way. I think a lot of them that were investigating on their own, let's say like Heroes of the Heart, they were trying to pull together photographic evidence. I think they believed that there were some good guys in this. I think they believed that somebody would want to know what happened here locally. I think that many of them thought that it was malfeasance and, on the part of local actors. I don't think they understood until it started unfolding more that it went way higher up the food chain. And so to me, it's a very good possibility that Terry thought he was talking to someone that may have wanted to help, someone higher up within the FBI.
Do you know, prior to the actual day of the bombing, was Terry into like any sort of conspiracy and like government plots or anything like that? Was it even on his radar?
No, we never talked about conspiracy theories at all. No. And once he was gone, I mean, the kind of people that I encountered, I often talk about meeting the legendary Ted Gunderson. Here I am, 26 years old. I am not wanting to hear half of what Ted Gunderson does and talks about, but I'm getting a crash course in conspiracy theories of, big magnitudes. I mean, I was aware of people like Kathy O'Brien, by the time I was 27, because I knew Ted Gunderson. Prior to that,
deep rabbit hole to go
as
from
a deep rabbit hole. And I'm just telling you, this is my world after he's gone, because once it's clear that that's what's happened to him, then and I'm grateful. I always say this. I'm so very grateful that I met Ted Gunderson. I'm so very grateful that he took me seriously. He came down and he met me and we talked, and he was the only person who straight shot me. You are in the worst position. This is a very dangerous position for you. You need to be around people because this is how these things play out. And I just started reading. I also met Anthony Hilder, if you're familiar with Anthony Hilder. They kind of ran together in a group, but these are, like you said, deep rabbit holes. These were not part of our lives. We were, Terry was 30 when he died. He had other aspirations, and conspiracy theories were not one of them.
Especially not like Ted Gunderson style, which is like satanic panic and mind control stuff. Like I could only imagine going from, hey, something weird happened and Terry's involved, and now you're talking to Kathy O'Brien about Project Monarch. So that probably must have felt very
busted
surreal.
Wide open. I'm 26. If I thought I was green then, I really know I'm green after that. It was surreal, but I'm really grateful, because if I hadn't had those conversations with Ted Gunderson and I hadn't started understanding what those kind of conspiracies could look like, I would have made more mistakes. I would have not taken it seriously. And nobody else was going to tell me. That guy was great. Ted Gunderson was such a gentleman.
And I assume that Ted Gunderson comes on the scene after basically Terry's killed, right? So,
no, Ted Gunderson came on the scene because of the controversies about what bomb was being used.
So
that's why he was down there.
Before Terry is gone?
Yes, he was there before. I did not meet him until he came down after Terry was dead. But they had, I think it was, they were supposed to have had 4, which included Ted Gunderson, people who specialized in bombs. I cannot remember the details, but there were 4 individuals that came Air Force down.
Too, I believe.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, there was a demolitions expert from the Air Force that came and wanted to do an independent investigation as well.
Mm-hmm, yeah, but there were some other guys that were involved in that, and that's where Gunderson got involved. He was asked to come down and do an investigation, and so he was investigating the bombing itself. But then a year later, we have multiple deaths. Dr. Don Chumley died first. He died in while he was flying his Cessna plane. It's been speculated that he was trying to fly information to someone. He was part of the group with Heroes of the Heart. Well, he died first. He died in September of 1995. And so Terry's dealing first with the building. Then his mom died in July. Then Don Chumley goes down in his plane in September. There's a lot going on. There's a whole lot going on.
When that happened and the doctor died, did Terry indicate that he thought that he might have been in danger to that kind of level too? Or did it just seem like a freak accident at the time?
They couched it as a freak accident, but I don't think Terry thought it was. He just wasn't saying a lot about it. I mean, Terry knew Dr. Don Chumley before the bombing. He had been his doctor at one point in time. I want to say very early 90s when Terry first came back from the Gulf War. So they were familiar with each other. But there's reason to believe that he was also, like I said, with Heroes of the Heart, and also had other ideas and had seen other things along with Terry. Whoever was in that first hour to 2 hours there at the main, the main area of impact. Whoever was there, I believe that they did a really good roundup of making sure that they tightened the story or got rid of certain individuals that weren't going to play ball. And Dr. Don Chumley just happened to be a very influential person. A little harder with him. He's civilian. Okay. But definitely, I know that Chumley saw something because Chumley was approached by the ATF. That was the problem with him. How far that goes with him after that, I don't know. But I do know he was involved with a group that I forgot to mention one other guy from Heroes of the Heart. That was Oscar from Midwestern Elevator. He's the one who his crew were able to disprove that any of the elevators free fell that day in the building. Oscar was part of that group as well. So you have Chumley was directly involved with them. It's a hard stretch to say that he knew nothing. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like he would have been considered a threat because of his social standing. Everyone knew Dr. Chumley. He had one of the most prominent clinics in Oklahoma City. So
even the way you phrase that Oscar disproved the free fall, that almost sounds like looking for a fight with the ATF to actively disprove a narrative that they're putting. I mean, were they looking for a fight in any capacity? Was there like a bone to pick with the official story amongst this? It sounds like there was a book being put together, but the people involved in putting this book together all suspected that something was awry.
Yeah, I mean, there are some other stories that are told, but they're hard to prove. One of them is about one of the alleged victims of the building, which is Michael Loudenslager. The problem with Michael Loudenslager is that some of the group from Heroes of the Heart, in particular, Ramona McDonald, was very verbal about this, that he worked for the GSA. And so there had been a complaint put through by the owner of the daycare about that munitions closet. And it is said that Michael Loudenslager was the one who filed that complaint. After he filed, and this was weeks before the bombing, mind you, okay? And after he filed the complaint, the daycare operator lost her license, okay? And apparently there was contention with Michael Loudenslager. Well, according to the group, when you say a bone to pick, the first bone to pick was Michael Loudenslager, because they all claimed that Michael Loudenslager was not in the building when it blew. They all say that he was at the federal courthouse and that he came across after the building had already been blown up and got into a fight with ATF, got into a fight with these guys that came out because, in his opinion, they knew about this. They were not doing right because he'd already had to file those complaints. And the next thing that they all know, meaning the group with Heroes of the Heart, all these people that claim that Michael was alive. Well, a couple of days later, they claim, I think it was the Sunday that the Clinton motorcade came in. So it was a day that there would be hardly any security on site at the building because they pulled it all to, cover the Clintons coming in town. So there was limited staff at the Murrah Building. And of course, most people are going to this memorial service to hear Bill Clinton speak. Well, on that particular afternoon, Michael Loudenslager is supposedly found dead at his desk in an area that had been combed through. And he's declared dead. And so what the group Hero of the Hearts had, their bone of contention originally was Michael Loudenslager, that the first death arguably would have been him to silence whatever he would have said or whatever he knew. And so I have no proof of that. I only have stories that have been told to me since 1997.
So, and just to clarify, Michael's contention there is that my understanding is that the ATF claims that they did not have an armory anywhere on site in the Murrah Building, and that they didn't have any sort of explosives or anything like this. Yet there were complaints about that exact thing by Michael originally. And then after the bombing, that was one of the other claims, is some people might have seen evidence that there was armory. There was some sort of ordinances there that the ATF had sworn before, during, and after never really existed. That's the main contention of that complaint, and what Michael was complaining about and what the ATF was saying didn't happen. Do I have any of that accurate?
Yes, and I believe it's not a dispute any longer. I believe there is some kind of reports and evidence that do substantiate that they, in fact, had a locker in the building. It did back up to the daycare, and they were bringing munitions in. I don't think that is speculation. The only speculation at this point was the report by Michael Loudenslager. We know that the daycare operator did, in fact, lose her license. That is not speculation. What the big speculation is, it's once again a fight between the ATF say it is so versus what other people witnessed. And other people say Michael was alive and was helping with the rescue operations. And then Michael goes missing, and he is found on April 23rd at his desk. And they claim he died in the building.
So Michael starts out one of these suspicious deaths. You mentioned the doctor's Cessna goes down, and then Terry ends up being one of these suspicious deaths. And Terry's death was that most of the major veins were cut, that he had bled out a significant amount of blood, that he parked the car, rolled all the windows up, and then locked it, and then ran about half a mile and then shot himself next to a tree. And that was essentially his suicide attempt, was that he tried to cut himself and then he ran as he's bleeding out and then he shoots himself. And is that, I mean, are there any other anomalies that I missed in what the official report is of that?
So it is a country road out there on federal government property. And it is surrounded by barbed wire fence that he would have had to maneuver first. It's 1.5 miles, actually, of rough terrain where the car itself was already, he had a little Ford Probe. I don't know if you know what kind of vehicle that is, but it's parked, it's locked. Yes, he had the wherewithal to remember to lock his car and make it over that barbed wire fence and make his long trek. But there's so much blood in the car, it suggests that he would not have been able to walk even half block. But yet they contend that he walked 1.5 miles to find this perfect location on federal government property. And then he shot himself at an angular trajectory that looks like an execution. That's a lot. It's a lot for anybody to be able to do. So,
in the CNN article from 2023, his daughter, his sister, LaShawn Hargrove, she basically says he was murdered because he knew too much. They have quotes from his friends that say no one believes that he killed himself. Like it seems all these different quotes. Was that the case from day one? Did, like, as soon as that happened, how many people really truly thought that something was being covered up and that Terry didn't kill himself, versus people like, oh yeah, he was depressed. Oh yeah, I can kind of see it now. Like, did it change at some point, or were his friends, family, and fellow police officers taking a stand early on saying there's no way Terry did that?
There were very few of us that were taking a stand early on. And of the officers who did, they only did so in very hushed ways of pulling you to the side to say, there's more to this story. I myself, when I was notified of his death, I was not notified that of anything but a gunshot wound. I got a mysterious call within a day, I want to say. Yeah, because the death was officially stated as May 8th. It must have been May 9th, either the night of May 8th. No, it would have been May 9th that I got the call for, and I don't know who it was. We didn't have, any kind of caller ID really back then. But I got a call. It sounded like someone almost like in the 911 operator's room to me. But that person said, you need to ask some more questions. Terry's throat was cut. And they hung up. So that's the first indication that I know that there's more damage to the body. So as a result of that, I demanded an audience with Chief Samuel Gonzalez the next day, and I was in his office and asking questions as to why I was not told that information. And then I'm finding out that there's actually about 13 physical cuts on his body, and they all seem to be they're at main where you would imagine his veins to be, all the main lines here on both sides. I mean, apparently it just, he just couldn't get it done. He cut himself 13 times on every spot, and then the neck was cut as well, and then the gunshot wound.
Well, all that happened in the car. Then he locked the car, put the windows up, went 1.5 miles away, and then finished, right?
There's very little blood at the scene. People that have come forward that were working the scene that night, because there were a lot of people on the scene because they could not find the gun. You would imagine that if there's a gunshot wound there, the gun should be lying next to him, and the gun was not. The gun,
Was the gun ever found?
The gun was found by Bob Ricks, former FBI special agent of he was on the Murrah case, special agent for that. He is flown in with Chief Samuel Gonzalez to the scene where people are combing. I mean, they have literal parties combing all over this property to find the gun, and they'd been out there for a while. But when Chief Gonzalez and Bob Ricks were flown out there, Bob Ricks gets out of the helicopter and basically does, oh, look, here it is. You guys just missed it.
He must have saw it because he was in the helicopter, so he could had a better view of everything as they were landing, probably.
Maybe. But what's really interesting to me is that at the time of Terry's death, Bob Ricks is no longer at the FBI. He's now like DPS. So I don't know why he was flown out there to begin with Chief Gonzalez. It was very interesting that he was even at the scene.
So usually whenever the official version of this account gets retold and it was Terry and it was suicide and that it was grief, and you already mentioned one of the examples was he felt bad because he couldn't save more people that day and that all the things that he saw. There's also things leveraged that there was turmoil in the family and that Tanya was keeping his daughters from him and that he was couldn't deal with all of this. I mean, do you want to dispel? Are there any specific claims that are worth dispelling from that?
Yeah. So I would say this: in a world where Juanita May Yeakey was still alive, none of that nonsense would have happened. I can assure you of that. But because she had passed away the year before, people just basically try to come and fill in the gap and say things that they had no idea what was going on. And so in particular, you mentioned Jim Ramsey, who made the comment about Tanya was keeping the girls from seeing him. No, Tanya was not. And we, in fact, the last holiday we spent was Easter, just a few weeks prior, at the apartment, hiding Easter eggs because it was raining cats and dogs outside. And we had talked about not getting divorced that entire year. That's another story that I've told in other arenas, and I don't want to jump around too much, but I'll stick to the main parts of your question first, and then we can revisit some other things if you want to ask more questions.
Yeah.
But we did end up getting divorced because Terry told me after we had decided not to get divorced that somehow, some way, the chief of police knew that we had discussed that. And this is the first indication that I have that we were probably under audio surveillance, because the conversations we were having clearly should not have gotten back to the chief of police. But in my opinion, they needed that divorce to go through, because you can't have them. It's hard to explain away the depressed and couldn't save lives, and you need him divorced. You need to have a bad marital situation to play into the story. So they were very invested in seeing us get divorced, even though we had determined we were not going to. And as soon as I went ahead and sent letters to my attorneys and was about to make all that official, he says chief police has threatened him and said, if you don't get a divorce, I'm going to make sure you don't have a job. It's divorce or you're going to lose your job. And he obviously took that threat seriously. I was upset about that because he had spent a lot of time working on me since the bombing to just, go ahead and stop the divorce, which I did. From April through November, we spent a lot of time and, trying to kind of patch everything back up, and had determined that was the course we were going. So to hear this at the very end result was like, well, if that's going to be the case, I mean, I don't know what to say to you after that. And so I let the divorce go through in December.
And Terry told you, hey, my superior, my commanding officer.
3 days after.
Okay.
3 days after I have sent a letter. And it didn't have to be, it could have been, if you think about how these things kind of work, if we've got a network of people that are invested in keeping stories, something as big as the bombing, if we're trying to keep that under wrap and we're doing damage control everywhere, we're keeping track of people's lives, we're keeping anybody who's a threat. It could have been one of the attorneys that told them that we were no longer getting divorced. It could have been any number of measures of where that information was coming. It also could have been audio surveillance. I don't know. I have no way of knowing, but I know what he told me. And he said 3 days after, chief police pulled me into his office. I don't know how he knows about it, but he says that if I don't divorce, he'll make sure I don't have a job. It's divorce or job. And I was like, well, so why are you listening to the chief? We have a similar personality in that I may be typically quieter than he is and a little less bravado, but if you get me worked up, I'll tell you in a heartbeat, I really do not care. I do not care what that man has to say. I do not care what we need to do. That's, other people don't control your life. It's like, why is this an issue? But for him, he said, if I lose this job, there's nothing. If this goes under, there's a problem, and I need to keep this job because I have to be able to support you and the girls. I can't not take care of my family, Tanya. I trust you more than I trust them. And I guess it's flattering in one respect that we have that kind of relationship that he can trust me. But at the same time, that's asking an awful lot of your wife to understand all these details that I can tell things are going on, but I don't have enough information. And even though I have a certain amount of trust within me for him, I know he's a good cop and he's a good guy. But at the same time, I'm a natural human being. I have a need to know what's going on, and I'm not getting that fulfilled. And so that's a hard place to be for me as a woman. So that was a difficult moment of, okay, I'm okay. But I don't know how I'm going to feel about this. Like the next time you come back towards me, I don't, why are we doing it? Why are we doing it this way?
Was there an understanding between you two that when that happened, it was like for your protection, or was that not necessarily something that you were understanding at that moment?
I had no understanding what this was other than, like he said, this is what he said. This is the threat that he's given me. And if I don't, I can't take care of you and the girls. And that's not okay. What I can do is I know that I can trust you. You have stuck with me. You have been there for me. We understand each other, but I cannot trust that they will not pull the rug out from under me. So if that's what's going to appease them, let them have it. I'm not worried. What's the difference here, basically, is what he was saying. He didn't say it quite that casually, but he was like, I trust them. I cannot. Let's just let it go through. And so I did. And so, I don't think until that moment that Terry really realized how genuine a relationship he had with me. Because, there had been some rough times in the past in 1993, but we were past those. But for you to for your spouse to go through all that, riding blind, and then when the divorce happens, I mean, if you look at my divorce, there's no contentious stuff in the divorce. I did get sole custody. He gave me sole custody of the children. But he has liberal visitation. It's written in the divorce in an unnatural way to the way divorces goes. It says liberal visitation anytime he wants, basically, with just minor notice, because we did not have a problem between him and the kids and me. So it was written in liberal visitation, and I took less child support than what I was due. So much so that the judge got upset with me, stopped the divorce proceedings. Terry didn't come for it, but she wanted an explanation for why it was not standard child support. And I told her that that's what I agreed to. She wanted to rewrite it. So this is the nicest, cleanest, most uncontroversial divorce for two people who supposedly had so many problems that he's despondent and he's killing himself. The divorce doesn't reflect it. So it was any potential for a story was between Tanya and Terry anyway, was de-escalated in December of 1995 when the divorce went through, because I did as he asked me to. I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to show that kind of goodwill, but I did because I believed him. After that, for the first few months of the next year, I'm kind of shell-shocked, to be really honest with you. I'm trying to get used to the new normal and what that means. And even though it's really interesting because that seemed to be the time frame in which I think I think he had a plan. I think he had a plan for how to maneuver out of the situation. And so we spent a lot of time even post-divorce. Like I said, he was there Easter. But he had a plan in mind, and we were still talking in general ways like we always had. But I was like, I don't know, I'm a little sore. You can't ask me for anything after you forced me through a divorce now. Don't talk about getting back together. I can't deal with that right now. But I don't think he realized until that moment, till I actually put it in writing and did what I said I would do, that he knew. It's like, okay, Tanya is definitely there for me. I just got to figure out how to get out of this situation. And I think that situation was whatever was going on with the bombing. And I think it was a bigger situation than what he understood it to be. I don't know. I say that, but some of the information that's come out from other sources tells me that he, at some point in time before his death, he knew that it was beyond the locals. At some point in time, he started to understand that this was a much broader conspiracy higher up into the FBI and such. So I don't know where he thought he was going to go and who his allies would have been. But it's clear that after things had calmed down with the controversy of the divorce, he felt like he had a plan. It was very clear from the way he was on an upswing. He was talking positive. So I never saw the despondency. People that have said so really didn't know him. They were not involved in his life. They weren't involved in our lives when we were raising our family. And people that have imagined it must be this thing. It must be him and Tanya girls. And that. Sorry,
there we go.
It cut out for a second, the feed. Are you still with me?
Yep. I'm still here.
Oh, okay. And that's where it goes wrong, is because they weren't asking Tanya. They don't want to know what Tanya has to say about it. They don't want to look at the actual contents of the divorce proceeding. They don't want to hear anything that has been going on behind the scenes. They go and they get sister. They go to biological mother. They were not involved in the day in and day out. And they definitely didn't know why the divorce had gone through and what Terry's plans were. They suddenly had a villain because the police department told them they had one. So
this is one that you told. I didn't even know about this angle of it, but another one of these justifications of why Terry would have killed himself is that he was on drugs or that he was taking. Can you give me more? I mean, I already know that you disagree with this approach, but like, what drugs was he taking? Like, what is this story and where did it come from?
So okay. Terry was seen, I believe, on May 7th out in the El Reno area, close to that area where he was found dead, like in the street area, apparently. There is an actual police report with Canadian County Police Department that shows that his car was seen out there, which is a very odd report. And the secondary report to that, according to Canadian County, that report has perished in some kind of flood. So they don't have the second report about Terry Yeakey being seen in the area the day before. Nobody can get a hold of that one. But it would have been, I guess it would have been later that night on May 7th that Terry is brought to his sister Vicki's house. Vicki also lived in El Reno at that time. And he is brought there by a Sheriff Clint Beer and his girlfriend, who was supposed to be a nurse of some sort. They drove Terry's car and drove him to his sister's house. And Terry looked out of it, not alert at all, very disorientated. Since I wasn't there, I can't say for sure what was said, but how the story came out was in a People magazine article that came out on May 27th. It states that Clint Beer drove him in this state. He came upon his car conveniently parked in front of Clint Beer's house in El Reno, Oklahoma. I don't know exactly. I'm sorry?
Did Terry know Clint Beer?
I don't think so. I've never heard this person's name in my life. And after doing some more research on who he was, as colorful of a career and personality as this Clint Beer had, I'm certain that Terry would have mentioned him to me if he was someone he knew from El Reno. There's no doubt in my mind. Never heard of him. Anyway, so Clint Beer tries to suggest that Terry drove over there, perhaps, and he was passed out in his front seat of his car, and there were multiple bottles of prescription painkillers and such in the front of his car. I mean, it almost the way he described it, you would have thought it was Marilyn Monroe's death scene or something. There was pills everywhere. Okay. And that they decided to bring him to his sister's house and drive his car over there. Now, I know of no sheriff in my mind that would come upon a scene like that and not write a citation and take him to a hospital, then jail. But no, this guy claims that Terry was just conveniently parked in front of his house. So they brought him here and they told the family, boy, he's really in a bad way. You all need to get him some help, and dropped him off. And then Terry leaves later that evening when he wakes up and he comes to and insists he has to leave, very much in the same way that Terry was doing me when he was in his most panicked, maybe feeling threatened times, when the first couple of days of the bombing after he left, after we went to the bombing site to see under the daycare. Right after that occurred, he said, I cannot stay here. And he didn't come back. Vicki described a very similar interaction with him in which he's like, she wanted him to go to the hospital. He's like, If I go to the hospital, they'll find me there. She didn't know who he was talking about, but she also wasn't very concerned about it. So he left, and no one saw him ever again until they found him in the field 24 hours later.
So that
was the end of that. So
the last time that Terry was seen was this alleged event when he was found with all of these pills and he gets dropped off.
Correct. Correct. And I have a problem with that now. I had a problem with that even back then because, as long as I've known Terry has never struggled with alcohol, drugs, or otherwise. Injuries didn't matter. Terry.
What about back? When you picked him up from the hospital and he had hurt his back as he fell through a whole floor carrying a 300-pound man, did they put him on painkillers at that point?
They offered him painkillers, but he didn't take anything. He just slept it off. And another thing was, the department was blocking any kind of workers' comp on that case for him as well. And so he would never take off. He continued to work injured when he went back to the police force. That was not abnormal for him. And the entire time I've known him, no prescriptions, no nothing. Okay. Terry doesn't drink. Terry doesn't have those kind of habits. And certainly if, let's say that he were to be using some, they're not going to be strewing it in front of his car. He's not trying to kill himself. And by the way, there's no toxicology report either. For that scene to have been reported the night before, okay, and mind you, Beeler is the only person who has ever made this statement about him, that, this is how they found him, but they decided not to take him to the hospital. That's insane behavior for a sheriff to do, right? Anyway, but Beeler also gave some statements to People magazine as though he knew Terry. Started talking about him as, he tried to make himself out to be this really macho kind of guy, but he really wasn't on the inside. And they're just kind of some strange comments to be making. And also that, basically it was the family's fault that, he killed himself, that why he died. We told those people, he's quoted as saying, we told those people he needed help. I can assure you with some of the things that Terry was going through, if Terry had a drug or alcohol problem, that would have been one of the easiest things for the department to get him on. They wouldn't have had to work very hard to, create issues for him as an officer if he had that kind of problem. So I know of no issues, never saw any issues, don't believe that to be the case. Okay. But Beeler also was making comments about the other death that happened, which was Dr. Don Chumley. It just so happens that Clint Beeler is he's a Cessna mechanic, a Cessna plane mechanic, has a very interesting background and history that I found on an obituary here recently. And one of the troubling things that I have found is that there were two men that I described when I gave my information to author David Hoffman back in 1997 when he wrote The Oklahoma City Bombing and the Politics of Terror. There were two men that I described that were tailing me after Terry's death. One of them was a rather tall, nondescript man that was using what looked to be like a shotgun mic, is what I found out later. I had no idea what they looked like, but when I described it to those who understood what those things were, they indicated that's what that is. The second individual was tailing me at my children's daycare, at my job, at home. I kept seeing this same person over and over again, and they seemed to like the fact that I knew they were tailing me, that I knew they were there. Kind of an aggressive personality. It wasn't until in the last couple of years when I went to go do some research on Clint Beeler that I found that Clint Beeler looks an awful lot like the gentleman that was tailing me, the second one that was most aggressive. I'm sure of it. I know some people may think, it's been 30 years. How would you know? But when you've watched somebody be at multiple locations and you're looking at them directly each time because you want to see who this person is. I've only recently found out that appears to me to be the same man, which is Clint Beer. So it's really ironic that he is the only one who ever tried to say that Terry Yeakey had a drug and alcohol problem. My opinion is that we have a little bit of a spook squad situation, that there were more people that knew and were actively involved in getting Terry to play ball, getting Terry back in line. And if he wasn't in line, then it looks like there was in my opinion, I can only speak for myself, but from what I have lived and what I have seen, there was an active effort to make it clear to him, you will either play ball or you're not going to be here. And that's what we saw play out in the last 2 days that he was alive, where he knew that he was not going to make it through.
And that was a new name to me when you brought it up, but it sounds like Clint Beer is a very interesting character in all this. I didn't know until you just mentioned that he was a Cessna mechanic, which is coincidentally how the doctor died, that he was one of the last people to see Terry alive, with this very odd story that Terry, who is, as far as you knew, Terry had no idea who this Clint Beer guy was, yet he drove to his house. And then Clint Beer is like, hey, let's bring you to your sisters, even though we don't know each other, and I'm not going to call this in or anything, and then just be on your way. And that he also ends up looking a lot like a guy that's tailing you for how long after this?
Let me think real quick. I have one prepared, that one. So Terry died in May. I actually moved out of Oklahoma City for a short period of time. At least 6 months. At least 6 months between May and December for sure. And a lot of the stories that I told to David Hoffman, the writer, they all circle around that time, including when my brake line was cut on my Explorer, the times that there was one event that was really bizarre. And I, now that I have a face that I can identify who that may have been, as far as who was tailing me, the story that I told about the front door of a house that I'd moved into was off its hinges, and it was placed literally right there on the porch next to the doorway. And when I walked into the house, I didn't see anything immediately out of place until I went to my bedroom area. And in the bedroom, there was a balloon tacked up that it was almost like somebody very meticulous did it, because like exactly the right dimensions around it. It looked like somebody went through a lot of trouble to put this balloon up. And it said, sorry to hear you're sick. This will keep you busy till you get better. And half of my, I say half, but pretty much all of my drawers that had my personal undergarments were strewn across my bedroom. So there's some really weird kind of intimidating behavior. This was after I had seen both of these gentlemen tailing me. Okay. It was after I had decided to move out of Oklahoma City. So it didn't matter. Distance didn't matter. The fact when I was in Oklahoma City is when I first saw them tailing me. I never saw them when I moved. I moved like an hour outside of Oklahoma City. It didn't matter. The harassment seemed to get a little bit worse. And it was not long after that I met Ted Gunderson. And I'm telling him and Hoffman these stories, and they're like, you're in a lot of trouble. They must be looking for something. They think they don't have the ability to know exactly what he would have told you in that first day that you took him home, because it's clear that we were under surveillance for a long time. Tanya and Terry wouldn't have been under surveillance the first 3 days of the bombing, if you think about it. People had their hands full. We weren't organized yet. They had too many fires to put out. But here they have him with me, and I'm the only one who's not buying into the story of his death. The family's buying it. They're saying things, they're just talking out their head. They have no idea. They just speculated that oh, Terry, they believed that Terry just was despondent. They believed whatever Jim Ramsey and whatever the police department told them, and they parroted it. Where Tanya is having a different experience, where she's going to the police department and demanding to speak to the chief, like she's somebody, and asking about why his throat is cut. Okay, so we have two very different dynamics. I think you'd asked this question earlier. Did family believe early on that he was murdered for this? Absolutely not. They did not believe that. They thought Tanya had something to do with it, and they wanted to punish Tanya. And they did everything that they could to do so for a long time until somebody came around and said, here's some more proof, and we think we want to do a documentary. Oh, then we believed Terry was murdered. Now, before that, it's all Tanya's fault. She must have done something. She must know something. They have no idea what they're talking about. And in the meantime, I've told them the kind of harassment I'm receiving, and it's just going in one ear and out the other.
The documentary you mentioned, is that Noble Lie, or was it a different one?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what's your opinion on Noble Lie? Like, do you think that they got a lot of it right? Is there anything they missed? Do you have any critical feedback on Noble Lie?
Very critical feedback, only in which that we had an opportunity at that moment to start deconstructing some of this mess. The department chose Vicki to be the person that they put out in front. Vicki and Glenn Jones being his sister, okay, and her husband. And this is really hard to talk about. I'm going to say something that I have not said at any point in time, not out loud on the air to anyone. But as I mentioned to you that Terry and I were getting along fine, even though the divorce had gone through. He'd been there at Easter. A couple weeks after, I guess he was trying to, I guess he had considered that it was a good thing that I had went ahead and moved out of the house for mine and the girls' safety. And he was just trying to take care of business. So he had asked his sister and her husband, who liked to do odd jobs, he said, hey, I'm going to have you come in and do some painting at the house. And if Tanya wants to move back into it sometime, that'd be great. It'll be fixed up for her, but we may actually sell it. He's not telling her that he's trying to get out of Oklahoma City and move away from the department and trying to get his family out of harm. He just tells her kind of just a pat story. Well, I didn't know that they were doing this. And my grandmother lived 2 houses down from the house that we lived in. In fact, she was really upset with me when I moved out, and I couldn't explain to her what was going on. But anyway, she told me somebody was in the house. And so I drove over to the house. I actually was home that day sick. And so I drove over to my grandmother's house. I could see the cars in the front. I didn't recognize them right off. So I said, okay, I'll go over there. And I did. And I see Vicki and Glenn in the house. Well, when I walk in, I'm getting all kind of guff and attitude. And I don't even know why. I'm just like, I don't even know that, I didn't even know they were there to paint. And so I walked through the house and I'm like, I came back and nobody has said anything to me. And I said, so what's going on? Just casual, what's going on? And Vicki just absolutely loses it on me. And this is the most ridiculous thing, but they had painting supplies and stuff, but there was also a plunger nearby. She picks up a plunger and starts hitting me with it. Because Vicki doesn't know and doesn't understand why she's painting this house and why the house that I supposedly got in the divorce I've moved out of. And to her, I look like some crazy person, some kind of mentally disturbed crazy person who is driving her brother crazy and he's being all nice and blah, blah, blah. She has no idea what she's talking about. She was just there to do some painting. Well, my grandmother had followed me over there and she saw them attacking me. And Glenn walks out on the back porch to smoke. And I'm telling Vicki, and she's not hurting me, but I'm like, what are you doing? In fact, I know that she has just had some kind of surgery, some kind of female surgery. And I'm saying to her, I'm like, Vicki, let go of my hair, let go of my hair. I said, because I'm staring straight at your midsection and I will take you out if you do not let go of my hair. While she's hitting me. Anyway, my grandmother called the police. My grandmother called the cops. And they arrive. And of course, Vicki's freaking out because she's like, literally says, oh shit, I'm going to jail. Oh shit, I'm going to jail. Because she knows what she just did. She called Terry. Terry got there very quickly. I'm confused. I don't understand what's going on. I'm sick as a dog. And, you know, his sister has attacked me. That's never happened. Okay. This is a first incident of any kind of whatever, but she was under the wrong impression already. She didn't understand what was going on and he didn't tell her. So he comes in and he's just looking, you know, really like, oh my God, how am I going to fix all this? Anyway, but they were afraid that I was going to press charges. I said, no, I just want them out of my house. And I need you later to explain to me what's going on here. And so that happened on April 24th. We're talking 2 weeks before he dies. I've described to you that I've let a divorce go through that is extraordinarily amicable and kind. We are getting along just fine. Everything has been de-escalated this entire way, except for the last 2 weeks before he dies. The escalation happened. They've been monitoring and surveilling us for all this time, looking for another big boom to happen. That was the big boom that made them escalate on him, in my opinion. That is why Clint Beer brings him to Vicki Jones's house and sets her up, because she needs to be prepped. She needs to be ready to be this fall person, this person who is going to then put me in line after the death. There was nothing wrong between Terry and Tanya all the way up until that time, until she throws a wrench in it, because she's just, like I said, she's a confused person. She's not the same as her brother. She's the one that has had alcohol and drug problems in her lifetime. She and her husband her husband was a felon. And so they're the ones that have the negative background and history that is so different from Terry. They're the perfect candidates to set him up. All they needed was the right escalation, and it dropped in their lap 2 weeks before. So go ahead. I'm sorry. You look like you have a question.
That was the criticism of Noble Lie, was what that they leveraged. Correct. Them over you for some of the insight.
Now you understand. I'm not just being petty here. I'm like, look, okay, there's a reason why certain people don't go to Vicki and Almar Jarahi, because they know nothing. They parrot what they've been told. Okay, any information they had. Eventually, I even forgave Vicki after and tried to work with her after the death, but they empowered her. And they put money in front of her, and she just took it and turned the other way. In fact, she says in the interview on A Noble Lie, she said that night, Mom, I can't be bothered with Terry, because she just got through getting into a situation in which she was scared that Tanya was going to put her in jail. But because Tanya's not trying to escalate things, Tanya's confused and has no idea why she's behaving that way, but she just came to her own conclusions. And then, of course, 2 weeks later, her brother is now dead. She has this guilt on her hands, and then she's getting these stories from the department. She then thinks she understands, and they're offering her money. And they're telling her that if for some reason they had this idea that Tanya was getting ready to go to jail, that Tanya was going to be brought up for suspicion of his murder. So much so that there's an entry in the court documents that shows that she was trying to gain guardianship of our children. Okay, so there was an active coup that the department put in place. This was now the family. They then claimed that Terry took both me and the children off of all his documents, that we were not included in any of his life insurance policies, which Terry's trying 2 days before to give me life insurance policies because he's saying he may come up dead. Those were also discussions. So, and I know Terry Terry at his core cared, and he would never leave his family in such a situation. But the department tries to tell Vicki, oh yeah, he's taken her off everything. You need to go to court and become the estate person. And they give her $20,000 on a accidental death and dismemberment policy. She thinks it's for her. She thinks it's her money, and doesn't use it for his burial. The man didn't have a headstone for a full year after his death. Okay.
Even despite being up for Medal of Valor and like the department, like, here's our guy, that we never gave him workman's comp and we didn't let him take a day off
and I have
after it happened.
Proof of those things on the workers' comp. Yes, I have proof of that, because when a noble came in, I mean, but I wanted to make it very clear to you, this part is not me speculating. I have actual documents because when a noble lie, the directors came to me like in 2005, okay? And I tried to tell them, hey, I am willing to work with you. This is great, blah, blah, blah. I'm not thinking anything negative of them, but I want them to understand, hey, I'm not going to get together and sing Kumbaya with them. Okay. They harmed my family. And I basically had to make one of those choices. Okay. Are you a person who knows Bible stories? Are you a person that knows Bible stories?
To Sunday school for the first 15 years.
You know the story of King Solomon when he's encountering two women.
With the baby, yeah.
With the babies, okay? That was it was just like that for me. I have this conundrum where I know I've just been through a escalation that they've tried to do with Terry. I've de-escalated it at every opportunity. I've acted on faith. I've acted on who I know this man is, even though I'm getting very, very bad, unclear information. I'm working in major ambiguity. Most people, especially women, don't like that. I was able to navigate it, but that's because Terry was a consistent person. Okay. What he provided in our relationship gave me enough faith to say, he's not perfect, man, but there's things about him that I can 100% count on. And those were the things that I had to use. Now here I have the department after he's gone, and they've set his sister up with this Clint Beer story and this idea that he just suddenly said, screw them kids, screw that Tanya. I took her off everything. We took, the kids get nothing. It's all coming to you. All you have to do is go along with what we say. She didn't know any better. And I'm sure she was quite traumatized herself. But she also had people in her ear who were even, Vicki was kind of a mixed bag. I really cared about Vicki. Vicki could be a good person. I don't mean to malign her in any way, but these were the things that I wanted her to naturally own so that we could go forward. So when a noble lie came and she's got Almar Gerari in her ear who has given up no less than a half dozen children up for adoption in her lifetime. I'm not saying Almar Gerari, he couldn't be a nice person, but she was definitely very detached when it came to the children. Okay. But that's who's in her ear at that time, as well as her husband. And so she didn't make good decisions. Even in spite of that, even though I knew the estate had been ransacked, nothing had been done right, if they would have just simply owned it and said, we're going to go forward from here and we're going to straighten this out and we're going to act, we're going to act in the manner that it should have been to begin with. Then Tanya would have played ball. But because they did not do that, I said, absolutely not. I'm not, you can forget that. And if you don't understand, they no longer have power because their power lapsed with the estate. Now, all of that by law falls under the kids and it falls under me. So if you're going to work with me, I'm happy to do so. But in the absence of their honesty, I will not. And that's what the big headache has been. And that was in 2005. Well, by 2010, they decide to go ahead and go forward with it and use Vicki and Almar and LaShawn. And I said, no dice. I went into the estate thinking that I had the evidence to show that they weren't in charge. And I found out that the estate had been languishing for 15 years and had been depleted. and her own attorney removed himself off the case for her lack of compliance. And so I had to go in and actually take over the estate. I wasn't just being crazy, I was being systematic. And the judge saw it exactly the way I saw it. He was like, this is crazy. What did you do for his children? Nothing. And so the judge handed me the estate. As soon as I did that, I went on some field trips. Like as soon as I left the courthouse, I went straight down to the workers' compensation courthouse and I pulled all records on Terry there. And then I'd made a trip out to El Reno and I pulled all the I fortunately went to the Bass Law Firm and they were getting ready to purge his records just before I got there. They said this was in line to be purged. And they gave me all the records where I could finally see the real story of what had occurred. And as soon as I did that, a lot of weird stuff started happening again. I always refer to it as Jumanji. It's like, Jumanji opened back up in my life from 1996. And in 2011, my life just tanks, absolutely tanks. They come after me. They come after my kids. They come after my second spouse. They wanted to put my head basically as far under as they could so that I could not ask questions and do anything with the power that I had just gotten a hold of.
What did you find specifically when you went and got the workman's comp and then you went to the law firm? Like, what did you see that was so dangerous?
Well, okay. So it aligns with a story that Terry told me in April of 1996, the month before he died. One of the things that he said he was going to go to have an interview with the FBI. Remember, I told you that.
Right. That you didn't about a job. Who knows what it was about, but he was going to talk to the FBI.
We don't know. We just know it's with the FBI. And his main reason for telling me is because, as always, Terry's always concerned with the way Terry loved was he was warm and affectionate and all those good things, but he was very purposeful about daily care. So, your daily reality was what he focused on the most. And so when he was getting ready to go to do this interview, he said, the only thing, T, is I really need to buy a really nice suit. I need to buy a really nice suit. I was like, okay. And so he was asking me, he's like, can you do without, any child support until I come back? And I was like, yeah, because he was used to me being, he used to joke that Tanya's kind of broke because everybody else is loaded. I always have something in reserve. But he came and he asked, he's like, I'll take care of everything when I get back, but I need to do this first. And I was like, sure, no problem. So one of the things he mentioned to me at that time in that conversation, he mentioned another officer to me that I really hope that there's some research that goes on this particular officer. That officer's name was Ken Griffin, okay? And Ken Griffin was also down at that site where Terry was, doing the same things Terry was, and he was extremely vocal about FBI not wanting to get their hands dirty and dig children out of the rubble, okay? He also apparently got hurt. Well, Ken Griffin, just like Terry, both had workers' compensation cases that were being tied up. They were not being taken care of. The difference between Terry Yeakey and Ken Griffin is that Terry knew that they would screw him. Ken Griffin had been on the force for a lot longer, and Ken Griffin was a by-the-book kind of guy. Apparently, Ken Griffin allegedly accepted some money from the Catholic charities. And Terry told me in that conversation, he's like, I really need to, escalate, me getting away from the department. And he mentioned that Ken Griffin was about to go to jail because of that. And you're welcome to look it up, but Ken Griffin he did in fact go to jail. He resigned literally at the same time that Terry was murdered.
Going to jail over taking money from
the Catholic charities when he was injured, and the department would not pay for his workers' comp. Same as Terry. Terry just gritted his teeth and went and dealt with it. Okay.
Was that actually illegal? For what? Because he was a police officer, you're not allowed to take charity, or like what was?
I don't know the particulars about this case, but they tried to say he defrauded them. Okay. And if you look up that case, Ken Griffin does in fact go to jail over not a very substantial amount at all. Even tried to pay the money back, pay the restitution. They still put him in jail. It was at the very same time that Terry comes up murdered. Very same time. So 2 people were taken out, okay? Ken Griffin goes to jail. He gets out and, restarts his life and everything. Sometime in 2008, and I can relate to this. As I said, the minute you look like you're doing something that might be a threat, in my case, going into the estate to defend my family was threatening because I was going to find out, I was going to see all that stuff with the workers' comp. I was going to see all that stuff with Vicki, all the details of things that were not paid, because we had deferred compensation accounts that were not paid. They were sent to the state treasurer's office as a sheeted property and hidden from me for 20 years until 2016. I have documents of that as well. They just completely mishandled all his estates, all his affairs. Everything was hidden. It was a great shell game. The reason I bring up Ken Griffin is because Ken Griffin got out of jail and then he's taken back to jail in some weird kind of story where the police suddenly claimed that he was about to murder his wife in a murder for hire plot, and they take him to jail. He says he's innocent. He hasn't done anything. He tells his wife not to believe it. And the next day he is hanging in his jail cell like Kenneth Trinity. He's gone too. 2 guys that were very, very critical of the FBI at the Murrah Building were told they could not come back to the site. There are records that on Ken Griffin that substantiate that he was taken off the site and put elsewhere the day of the bombing. Why? Because he criticized an FBI agent. Okay, same with Terry. You can't come back to this building. Very interesting that all these stories end up in the worst of the worst, most Hollywood-esque stories that they can make. They like to be very dramatic with these stories as well. I can't speak on Ken Griffin for sure. I don't know if he's really that person, but I know what Terry Yeakey, that's the only officer that Terrence Yeakey mentioned to me in April of 1996, just before he was murdered. And those things played out. I saw the same thing in Terry's workers' comp cases as what he described to me was going on with Kenneth's. But Kenneth went to jail.
We're almost 2.5 hours into this, and I think maybe I'm way late in asking this question. I should have opened with this question.
Sure.
Is my life in danger from talking to you about all of this? Like,
No.
am I going to have someone following me? Maybe. Is there a chance of that?
I was asked that by somebody else. No, I don't think so. I think that they have I think that I'm very small in their world of problems these days. And the only reason that I'm still saying what I am on air is because, we can talk about spook squads all day long, but, we just talk about them in that they exist. And, we know that they're linked here and they're linked there. And, we know that that's that. But do we know what that actually looks like on a regular everyday basis? Do we know what that looks like in our communities? Do we know? You understand what I'm saying? Is like people, they only hear about them existing, but I don't think you hear many cases in which there's an awful lot of evidence leading back to, Oklahoma City Police Department was very complicit in his death. I've changed my position on how I feel about them. Before I wondered, as well, was it higher up? I think the death occurred right here with people that were in place to do so. I don't think it went any higher.
At the point, or right now, as I'm talking to you, do you think it went up to FBI, ATF, beyond that, or do you think it was all localized?
I think the FBI had their own problems to deal with the actual bombing and the litigation and all the witnesses to the bombing itself. All the people the 24 witnesses that they had to dismiss as seeing John Doe 2. They had their hands full there. In my opinion, I feel like the entire way that OCPD gave assurances that they would get Terry Yeakey in line. I believe that. And I believe they left it at a more localized level. Maybe there's specialized people at the local level who have been trained to take care of problems like that. But I've changed my opinions now. I think before I thought, it's got to be FBI, it's got to be ATF. I'm not so sure anymore, especially once I realized that I could actually identify one of the two men that were tailing me, and he showed up specifically in the story. Other people might think that's crazy after 30 years, but I know that's who that was.
Well, I don't think that's crazy, but that's also because my mind ventures into the truly outlandish claims that come up when we get to OKC. So let me ask your opinion. Like, have you heard of the sheep dip theory that Timothy McVeigh was sheep dipped? Are you familiar with this and what that means?
Yeah, I am. Mm-hmm.
So essentially that he was a plant from day one, that even when he went through basic, he was kind of ear flagged as, here's someone that could be useful to us. And that at a certain point in his military training, he gets quote unquote kicked out of the military. But in reality, the conspiracy aspect of the sheep dip is that by paperwork appearances, he was kicked out. But in actual reality, he was put even deeper in. He kind of like became like an undercover agent for far right extremism, but was essentially working for 3-letter or military or whatever you want to fill that blank in. But that he was sort of an antagonist in some capacity. What is your thoughts on that? Do you think that there's any truth to that? Have you speculated too far on that?
I have. I read pretty avidly, and I tend to look at all theories, just like I would look at all news outlets to see what each one is saying. It's certainly a possibility. It sounds plausible on paper, but when you look at the way McVeigh interacted with people, especially the Jesse Trinidad team, or I don't know that he actually he himself interacted, but when you look at some of the information from Terry Nichols as well, I don't know. I have some questions. He seemed to be a rather arrogant sort, which could indicate that he thought he was part of some, elite group. It's certainly a possibility, but I have a lot of questions about him and his character and the things that he had to say. That seems like he's either a really good actor or he's a really stupid person. I don't think there's a, obviously you can appreciate that. I don't think there's a lot of in between there. It's got to be one or the other. And either way, he doesn't appear to have come out on top at the end of that. If he trusted and he was in fact sheep dipped, boy, did that end badly for him. So
what about the rumors of Jolly West being involved in Timothy McVeigh? Have you ever gone down this angle or familiar with that name?
Well, he appears in a lot of places. The fact that he was even the one that was working with McVeigh is suggestive of a lot of, it seems like it's suggestive of MK Ultra potentially. I tend to subscribe to most things that are associated with Jolly West. I think that, we've got a pretty good feel for what he was and what he was doing, no matter where he showed up on the scene. So I know that it is a fact that he was actually there dealing with McVeigh, correct?
I know that there's reports of that. I think the best book that I've read on the topic, I don't want to flub the name. I think it was like Wendy Painter that wrote Aberrations in the Heartlands of the Real. And I think that that's one of the main sources of a lot of these claims that Dr. Jolly West was brought in to talk to McVeigh. Although when you try and actually do a FOIA request, you're like, all right, where's the paperwork that proves this? It gets very, very difficult. But he seems to be a person whose name would come up in any large national tragedy that had some sort of speculation going on. Like he would just pop up in like the worst times and the best of times, right? JFK and Jack Ruby, I think, was like another huge one, was that he had always been around there. So whenever his name comes up, it definitely attracts conspiracy theorists like moths to a flame almost whenever Dr. Jolly comes up.
And that's why I don't have a definitive stance on Tim McVeigh, because what you just said right there, there's so many things that moth to flame activity. And for me, I have less interest in McVeigh as someone who is, you could look at me as victim, survivor, whatever the case, however you want to categorize me. And my least area of interest is McVeigh. I want to know what our ATF knew. I want to know what our FBI knew. I want to know who those who were charged with keeping us safe and protecting us, what they did or did not do. That's more interesting to me than deep diving into McVeigh. I mean, he clearly was a patsy. I mean, he clearly was a fall guy in some way. And so he's gone. There's not much more he can tell us. We could speculate all day about what, was going on in his mind and what he'd been a part of. But I want to know about all these agents that, was there bomb squad? Was there people already in place in full tactical gear, like Terry has said there were? Who knew something in advance? Those are the things that interest me.
If we rewind this to before Oklahoma City, and I guess the motivation on paper for what McVeigh allegedly did, I have to put all like the qualifiers, right? But that lone wolf McVeigh, but that it was essentially a retaliation for what happened at Waco, which was also the last day of the standoff, was also today, April 19th. And that also happens to be one of these points of contention of, did the ATF and the FBI do something intentional? Did they overstep their bounds? Was some of this planned ahead of time? Do you have any thoughts specific to Waco in context of all this?
Well, obviously Waco was drastically mishandled, and I tend to believe that the FBI and the ATF had good reason to try and come back from the Waco incident. I don't know if that was a pre-planned thing for Waco itself, but their drastic mishandling of it, they didn't do themselves any favors. Okay. So for me, for the Oklahoma City bombing to come on the same day and McVeigh be painted as this person, as just this one person who just decides he's going to be the equalizer. I don't know. It sounds like a whole bunch of other Hollywood-esque stories that the FBI and the ATF come up with. And so I don't have a lot of strong feeling about premeditated on Waco. That's a harder one for me to answer because I know overall story, but probably not the nuts and bolts. But just as a layperson who has had this always be the story of why McVeigh did Oklahoma City, I don't know, the same characters, just like you said, Jolly West shows up in the same places. Well, we got the same ATF agents and FBI agents showing up in the same places. I mean, are these really coincidental? No, they're not. I mean, I know people are just working and living, and if you work for the ATF, you go where the job is, but the same screw ups, the same fingerprints on each and every case they work. It's hard to say. I really don't even know how to answer that one.
Well, let me ask you to complete speculate here, right? We're not asking for facts that you can back up, but in heart of hearts, do you think that the Oklahoma City bombing, do you think that that was done by the government? Do you think that was an inside job?
I think they had foreknowledge, and I think that they had the ability to stop it. Unless there's some other element that we don't really fully know and understand that plays on a more international level. I know that was also speculated in the Oklahoma City bombing. I think they're guilty. I don't know at what level that they participated or stood down. But yeah, I think they had the ability to stop it. I think they had enough information. Now, how far down that goes and whether it was premeditated, I mean, there are a lot of reasons that you could say that they it was a power grab. You know, you had what was it, the Patriot Act after, and it's just 5 years off from 9/11. And the same characters followed to the next biggest and best bust in the United States. It's like, you know, and when I say bust, I mean tragedy. I mean terrible. You know, when you go from Waco to Oklahoma City to 9/11, you know, that's, I don't know, it could be argued that way, that it was intentional on their part.
Where are you at on 9/11 on that same question? Do you feel a certain way about that being whether it could have been prevented or they orchestrated the whole thing, but like to that same level of scrutiny that you're talking about Oklahoma City?
Yeah, that one looks more orchestrated to me than all of them combined. That one looks more orchestrated. There's more. You know, you have the Clintons also running through the thread of those together. And so there's been power grabs each and every time. I don't know if they've just capitalized on tragedies or not. And just, you know, can't waste a good tragedy, you know, that's what Rahm Emanuel always said. But 911 looks way more organized, and you'd have to be more organized to pull off something of that nature. I can't imagine that we knew nothing about it. That we just, but to argue and say that they did it, that's a lot. I mean, most people want to see some definitive evidence, and I've kept up on the 911 stuff. There's been videos that have come out since then, you know, showing, you know, fires higher up in the building, just the same as people said in the Murrah Building, that there were things coming off the upper floors. And so all these things, yeah, you know, it's going to make people speculate the worst. I hate to say that they are in fact doing these things, but it can't be ruled out. And so I don't usually go around saying, well, I've kind of accused the government of killing my husband. So I guess I've already gone there. I might as well just,
on the actual day of 9/11, did you have suspicions that day, or was it like over time and you hear other people speculating where you're like, oh yeah, maybe this was a conspiracy?
It never looked right to me. It never looked right.
Even as it's happening on 9/11, you're thinking.
I'm from New York. I was born in New York. I remember the Twin Towers. I know those places. And so for me, you know, just, no, it didn't look right. It looked Hollywood-esque again. It looked very dramatic, but it was when you're in the middle of processing the actual tragedy, you're not wanting to focus on those things. But my initial response that plane took down the tower, it didn't jive in my mind. And so as time has gone on and more evidence has come up, the less likely I think, you know, that was the actual cause. And it's just very convenient. You know, when it comes to the Clintons, they got their boost at Oklahoma City, and we know how dirty Oklahoma City was. How ironic that
as soon as Hillary Clinton weasels her way into New York City, of all places, that the next tragedy like that happens. That has always stuck with me. So
another interesting fun fact for trivia night.
I probably do believe a little more to the side of the government is do what?
I was saying, whenever trivia night comes up again, too, this is an interesting one that during Waco, 3 of the 4 ATF agents that died, 4 of those people were on Bill Clinton's personal security detail that he actually admitted on a public statement later on. So their names have been added to like the Clinton body count for reasons of like, oh, why was it these 4 guys? But it does seem that like very strange instances of tragedy seem to trail them around. Maybe just a numbers game, but you're the one that brought it up, so I just figure I'd slip in.
I did. Well, Terry was listed on the Clinton Road galleries at one point in time. I don't see his name usually anymore, but in the early 90s, his name was appearing. And I've always been quite critical of the Clintons. There's no doubt in my mind that and especially with the things that we've seen now come to light, bad apple doesn't even begin to cover it. So it's just how deep and how many people are involved.
Would you consider Terry Yeakey on the Clinton body count list?
Yeah. Yeah,
so
definitely.
We've talked about a lot of heavy topics. Very personal to you. Thank you so much for answering all these, and I've got some more questions that I want you to speculate on, but it gets easier from here. Let me just play a quick little intro and we're going to get into it.
Hey, conspiracy buffs, I double dare you to take some PCP, the Paranormal Conspiracy Probe. On your marks, get set, and go!
Okay, we can take a little bit of a breath here. We're not going to be talking about death and tragedy or anything else. I want to know where this is after everything you've been through. You hung out with the legend Ted Gunderson. You're familiar with Kathy O'Brien and MK Ultra and Dr. Jolly West, and so you kind of know the gamut. So I want to know, for example, do you think that we landed on the moon?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. I tend towards I don't know. I don't have an opinion on that one just simply because I don't know enough about it, but
when you're in your gut feeling, let me ask it this way. Let me ask it 2 different ways. The first one.
Okay. He's like, I want an answer.
Do you think it's possible for a human to land on the moon? Like, do we have the technology or the physics there? Is the moon actually there? Like, is it a realistic possibility that someone could stand on the moon?
Is it a realistic possibility? That I know things are said that we don't have the ability to go out a certain level of the atmosphere, but that's gossip. That's rumor. I don't really know. I don't have an answer for that one. I've heard all the conspiracy theories on it, but in terms of, I'm definitely not a scientist, so that's why I hesitate to answer that one. I'm not well enough versed on, the moon conspiracy, but I know a lot of people think that we haven't. And I don't happen to think about that one a whole lot. So, if we can't land on the moon, I don't know what Elon Musk is doing. What's going on there?
Okay, how about this? This one's related, but what about the theory that Stanley Kubrick was involved with filming whatever got shown in 1969 as the original Apollo 11?
That's right.
Do you think that has any legs, that theory? Do you think that that's something that the government would have hired him to do?
Okay, since you invoked Stanley Kubrick, because I'd forgotten that he was part of that. I think that is possible. That one, I do think that it's perfectly capable for them to fake something. I do. I think they would do it. Did they is really the question for me. Do I think they're capable of that kind of ruse to play on the public? 100%. But Stanley Kubrick, tell me the question one more time.
Well, I guess that the footage that was actually shown to people, like here's the astronauts playing golf on the moon. Was that like a Hollywood soundstage, Stanley Kubrick directed thing? Okay, good. Let me just ask you too on this segment.
Yeah, I'm probably going to go with that one.
If you had to give it a rating of like 1 to 10, 10 meaning absolutely true, 1 meaning there's no way that's possible, where would you put it on that scale?
No, it's probably going to be in the 8, 9, 10 category. It's up there pretty high.
How about with Bigfoot? Where would you rate Bigfoot on that scale?
Just whether I believe in him?
Yeah, if you think Bigfoot exists now or ever existed and any of the sightings have ever been real.
Yeah, I think they could have been real. I do.
Are we like a 10 out of 10 real or like a 8 out of 10?
Things that I can't say with specificity, I'm going to go with a 9 out of 10.
How about flat Earth? You know about flat Earth theory?
I know about flat Earth.
Where
was a hard one. I don't.
There's no right or wrong answer here. This is just.
No, I'm thinking. I'm trying to answer honestly. So, I mean, when you've touched on all these conspiracy theories, they kind of tend to run together after a while. But I've not typically been a flat earther. It's not something that's really garnered my attention.
How about dinosaurs? And when I say dinosaurs, I mean you said you grew up in New York. You go to the Natural Museum of History and you see the big T-Rex, whatever. Like that, those dinosaurs were real at some point in history.
I think they were real.
Like a 10 out of 10 real or like a 6 out of 10 real?
Well, I mean, there's things that we see now that are large size animals. I mean, the idea that they could have existed, did they or not? I can't say definitively they did, but could they have existed? We've seen all kinds of other animals. Now, whether or not man was around or, what the status of the planet was, I don't know that one either. And I just find that one to be kind of an interesting, they don't seem like they could coexist together too well, but I would say probably 6 out of 10 on the dinosaurs.
How about dragons? And I mean like fire-breathing flying dragons. Having ever existed in history.
I think they could have existed in history right along with the dinosaurs, sure.
How about aliens? Like little gray guys or little green guys or whatever, but like an actual alien from outer space.
I'm not too big on the green men. I don't think that's what they are. I kind of go from the standpoint of you're probably dealing with something that's, fallen from the heavens. I'm more in that theory.
Okay, so that the aliens are demons theory. So that the next one.
Yeah, I'm more likely to believe the aliens are demons theory.
So where are you at on demons? Like an actual demon that you could summon and follows you around and like agent of hell and all of that.
10.
10 out of 10. Is it same for angels?
10.
Okay, this one's a little bit more of like a niche question, but I'm genuinely curious on this one. Let's say a 12-year-old kid, total innocent, right? Total innocent person. They're not a bad person. They go on Amazon and they order a book that says how to summon a demon, and they get it overnighted and they read through it and they do whatever the thing says. They read it out in Latin and they cut their finger and they draw blood and they do a little, sigil and they do all the things. How likely do you think it is that innocent 12-year-old that's experimenting in the dark arts might actually summon a real demon?
Not likely.
So you think it would actually require someone to be evil and to be doing evil things to actually be able to summon a demon and not just like accidentally because you read some Latin in the right order?
Yeah. I think there'd have to be more to it. I don't think that someone who, as much as we've seen people that really believe in this, that, outwardly show that, they are for the dark arts, so to speak, they got to put some work into it. They don't just summon demons every day. They got to put their back in it. I don't think the 12-year-old who read something off Amazon is just going to stumble. I think that's not likely.
Are you familiar with the Stranger Things series and like the general premise of it? Okay. Where would you rate that? Do you think that there's an actual government program somewhere that children are being trained to astral project and talk to entities in other realms?
Oh, yes, I do. Yeah.
How about, could you rate it on a scale to 10? Are we talking like 10 out of 10?
Yeah, it's the 9, the 10-ish. Yeah, I believe that.
Okay. And then here's an older one, right? This one's maybe a little less controversial because it's like over a century. What about the theory that the Titanic was intentionally sunk for an insurance fraud and that 1,500 people died just because JP Morgan wanted to make some money? Are you familiar with this one about the Titanic scam?
So, I mean, there were a lot more. There were a lot of people on that boat, were there not? That were of. There were a lot of influential people that perished on that boat. Correct.
Right. So,
there were other than just.
So there's multiple theories on the Titanic. The main one is just that there was a sister ship called the Olympic, and the Olympic had been damaged while it was out at sea, and it was damaged so bad that it was going to have to be sold for scrap metal, and it wasn't insured. So instead of JP Morgan taking the hit on just selling an entire ship as scrap, the theory was that he repainted and rebranded the damaged ship and said, this is the new Titanic. And then he took the new ship that was the Titanic and made that look like the old ship. And then on the quote unquote maiden voyage of the Titanic, it sinks and he gets his insurance money back and 1,500 people die on board. And it just happens to be a coincidence that his largest opponents in multiple industries, one was against the Federal Reserve. They happen to be on the boat that sank, right, and they're not in the way anymore. Also, the last remaining financier, John Jacob Astor, who was funding Nikola Tesla's work, he dies, and then Tesla no longer has funding. So like there's multiple reasons that JP Morgan made out in the end, but the ultimate conspiracy was that he sunk it for an insurance fraud, and everything else was just like 5 birds with one stone.
Yeah, see, I didn't know the part about the Olympic. That part that's new information to me. But I knew that there were other influential people like who you mentioned. Yeah, I'm going to give that one a 7 out of 10.
Okay, and then here's the last one. The JFK assassination. Did Lee Harvey Oswald, do you think he was acting alone? Or do you think that there was government involved?
10, they did it. Yeah, 10. So no lone wolf.
Are there any other conspiracy theories that you were introduced to through like Ted Gunderson or anyone else that you've kind of been interested in that I didn't bring up that maybe I should look into?
Oh, no. Well, you cover most of the satanic panic stuff pretty regularly in the adrenochrome.
I hope not. I hope you can't think of anything that I haven't already covered because I want to feel like
what'd you say?
I said I want to feel like I hit most of the things, but if there's anything that I've overlooked or not brought up, I'd love to know.
No, I'd have to really think about that because you pretty much covered just about everything. And you hit me with a couple. I'm like, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that one too much. So,
well, okay. Last parting question then. Let's say that someone hears the name Terry Yeakey in 20 years from now, right? Let's say it's 2050 something, and someone's still talking about him. What do you hope comes up first when they search for him, or what do you hope that he's remembered for in 20 years from now?
Well, I'd want him to be remembered for the way he behaved that day. The person that Terry was. Both his outward facing and his inward facing, they were pretty much the same person, that he was an excellent officer who did his job, cared for people, and did not think of his own self-interest. He dove in to save others, that he knew right from wrong. It didn't, he was not someone who was going to stand down because someone told him to, that he went straight in to protect and save lives. And that in addition to that he was a person of authority who, had things to share about what he saw and experienced on the ground that didn't match the official story, and that he was willing to hold that line, even if it meant that he would no longer be with us, that he was brave enough to see it through from beginning to end. That's what I would want people to find out about him.
And I mean, I hope that this interview does a lot in terms of getting people to understand him more, of someone that liked Art of Noise and someone that liked horror movies, and, right? Like not just this guy that his life ended in tragedy and there's conspiracy all around it. Like, this is a real living human being that was legitimately altruistic, was a great person to be around. Like, that there's a human element to this, and it's not just conspiracy fodder. And I mean, me being in this space, I realize how often like entire lives of people almost are like, turn into commodities of like podcast topics, or like, oh, if I drop this name, I'll get these clicks. And this is legitimately feels like one of the absolute most important interviews I've ever had. It's like one of the most important people that doesn't get the credit that they truly deserve. Like, there's so many of these conspiracy podcasts, it's always on like the jollies, right? It's always on like these horrific people that are doing really bad things. And I think part of that is because there's so few people that like in Terry's case, right? They didn't want him associated with this event, but because he was a first responder and because he rushed to the scene, they couldn't not get his picture in all these videos. And because that he was consistent, like, it was someone that couldn't be bought off or snuffed out or hidden from the limelight. Mm-hmm. And that seems so rare, because either they can get to you earlier or they can make sure that footage doesn't make it out. There's like a million reasons why it doesn't happen. And to me, Terry feels like one of those people that slip through the cracks in a good way, which is so incredibly rare. And I want to thank you too for coming on and talking and being vocal about this, because like, without you telling some of these details about the story, there's really no one else out there talking about Terry.
Well, and a lot of them have passed away. There's a lot of individuals that when I speak of them, they're already gone. And, for me, I just want people to have more clarity. And if there's a way to straighten out the details of the story in such a way that it does him justice, but also moves these situations, because I don't believe that we're an anomaly when it comes to what the government is willing to do. If they don't want you to say something, if they don't want you to call them out for their behavior, and people need to have a better idea of how these stories unfold. I mean, we just hear surface level of everything. And even more importantly is how to be able to protect yourself when they come to twist the story and use people against you and just continue to keep it buried. People need to be able to stand together. People need to act more like a community. People need to listen better than, what they have over the years, because these stories are not going to be just, linear in their trajectory. There's going to be a lot of mess, because when something's being covered up, it's very much art of war. The entire premise is to deceive the public. And so everything's placed on that board to do so. And that's really why I've continued to be, like I said, not critical so much. I mean, it comes across as critical, maybe even biting. But I think it's necessary for people to understand just how much deceit was involved with this story.
Well, Tanya, thank you again for spending 3 hours with me on dredging all this old personal stuff up. And hopefully I got some good questions in here that people haven't gotten the answer to before. And I just really want to encourage everyone to do more research into Terry Yeakey and all the other names that came up in this interview. So thanks again for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you as well. We had talked about doing this back a while, and I wanted to make good on my promise.
We did it. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Just buy something. Just buy something. From Paranoid American. Just buy something. say it back. Need that print, nod your head, give consent. Buy a comic, 3 or 4. Think this thought, I want more. Buy a sticker from the store. Think this thought, I want more. Just buy something. Just buy something from Paranoid American. Just buy something. Just buy something from Paranoid American.
Paranoid. Yo. I scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain? Give you the flight, my plane. Paper, the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real. You will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the Lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hate, maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Matters not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when the beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.